There's a local legend where I come from. They're simply referred to as the Willow Men. There's hardly a need for the new law enforcement in this town. The Willow Men, they take care of all of it. Every single step taken, every word spoken, every drop of blood spilt. The Willow Men know about it before anyone else. Believe me, anyone that has invoked the wrath of the Willow Men has gone missing without a trace. And that's why when I realized what I had done, it was too late. The Willow Men were coming. She just wouldn't shut the hell up. No matter what I said and what I would do, she just acted hysterical. She kept pacing around the house screaming. She said she found this and that and knew I was cheating on her. She asked me who it was, and I told her she was crazy. I guess I wore that excuse out. After a while, I couldn't take her damn voice anymore. I'd walk room to room, and she'd follow me, and when we got to the kitchen, I had my fill. I reached for the first knife I could find and jammed it into her throat. The face of anger and sorrow melted into one of despair and disbelief. The crimson fluid ran freely all over her blouse. She dropped to her knees, scrambling around on the floor. She clawed at the tile and made gurgling noises, which only served to infuriate me. I grabbed an iron skillet that had been preheating on the stove and took a swing at her head. A wet crack followed the impact, and while I didn't need to keep going, I did. I lost count of the number of times I hit her, but I had a good deal of blood on me. What was left of her head was held together by thin particles of bone, and blood continued to rush out. I dropped the skillet to the floor with a loud clang. I wish remorse could have followed, so I would have felt at least a bit human. But it didn't. I was just happy to be rid of her. With a grunt, I picked her body up off the floor and hoisted it onto my shoulder. Her face hung next to me, dead eyes staring with conviction. I could only chuckle. As soon as I got outside, I dropped the ragged heap onto the ground and went to find a shovel. That's when I knew they were watching. I could hear the whispers from the woods, and in the corners of my eyes I could see them staring intently at my every move. Whenever I would look up to the woods, I would find only gnarled trees staring back at me. I knew they were there. It was dusk by the time she was good and buried. I was drenched in sweat, and it had made the bloodstains on my clothes expand and turn orange. I looked back up into the woods, and I saw them. I saw them peering from behind the trees. Long, gnarled faces with hollow eyes. Gaunt figures. I could only half see the faces as they chose to hide behind their precious trees. But they were there. Watching. Whispering. "What are you staring for, you bastards, huh? You heard her. I had to do it," I yelled at them. I was expecting a response. I don't know. They just continued to watch me from behind the trees. I spit on the ground and threw the shovel down. They'd come for me under cover of darkness. I wasn't going without a fight. I stole away to the house and prepared. I pushed couches and dressers in front of doorways. I nailed wooden boards haphazardly to cover all the windows. As the sun crept underneath the horizon, great trepidation settled in the pit of my stomach. Was it honestly nerves? I hated to think that it was such a powerful fear that I'd start breaking into an ice-cold sweat. I loaded up my shotgun and I reached for a bottle of whiskey. I forced down a mouthful and then another, and slammed the rest of the bottle against the wall in frustration. One door I left open. was the back door, the one that stared out into the woods. I put a chair down in front of it and sat, shotgun in my lap. And there they were. They were still staring at me. The Willow Men. We stayed staring at one another for 3 days. Eventually, exhaustion began to get the best of me and I started to nod off. I tried desperately to keep my eyes open. For a foolish second, I propped my head up with a shotgun so that it wouldn't fall. I snapped back to reason and lifted my head high. Last thing I wanted to do was shoot myself. Had I known what was coming, I probably should have. I pushed myself to stay up a few more hours. The day came and went, and it was the dead of night before I knew it. They persisted behind the trees. I began to rationalize that if I closed my eyes for a second, I could have enough time to open them while the Willow Men were coming at me so I could take a few down. Smiling, I did just that. But of course, it's difficult to tell how long you were asleep. Could be a second. Could be for days. I opened my eyes again and I found I was still sitting in my chair with my shotgun on my lap. I snapped up when I saw that the Willow Men were no longer behind the trees. I flipped out and held the shotgun up, darting around, barrel first. I took a few steps outside and tried to control my heavy breaths. I shook damn near uncontrollably and found it impossible to keep the gun steady. I began to calm down when I didn't see anything outside. And began to return to my post when I stopped, dead in my tracks. I felt tears well in my eyes, and something began to push up and out of my throat. The Willow Men were peering from around the doorway and the sides of the house. I froze, staring at their gnarled-up faces and branch-like hands. I had to do something. I pulled the gun up and fired off a round. It managed to take out part of the doorframe, but it missed them altogether. I popped open the shotgun and madly grasped for a fresh shell in my pocket. I successfully reloaded it and lifted the gun back up. The Willow Men continued to look at me from where they had been. I took careful aim this time and fired once more. Another shot hit the doorframe. Although this time it was closer to the Willow Men. I fumbled for a third round, and as I did, I saw a large shadow cover me. Looking up, the Willow Men were upon me. I screamed and closed the barrel down on my thumb, effectively severing it. Immediately after that, I lost all consciousness and collapsed. When I awoke, it was ice cold. My vision began to return to me slowly, and I could feel that I was being dragged. My heart sank when I looked around. Darkness stretched as far as the eye could see, and I knew I was in the deepest part of the woods. Where my thumb had once been was black, swollen, and had managed to numb up to my forearm. My ankles were in severe pain too, but I didn't know why. When I looked, I saw they had been clearly snapped, and the Willow Men were dragging me by my feet. I began to scream as loudly as possible for someone, anyone. All I did was cause more Willow Men to appear and watch from behind the strangest willow tree that I'd ever seen. Their trunks were small and looked like leather. The earth around them was red and moist, yet where I was being dragged was dry, rugged land. I looked up to the canopy and I wish I hadn't. Skinless corpses hung down, blood dripping freely to feed what I now knew were flesh-bound trees. My screams were swallowed by the dark, and my throat gave out, hoarse from the strain. In the silence, I heard the faint moaning. I looked around to see if there was someone else here. Maybe some poor bastard who suffered the same fate. To my horror, I discovered the source of the moans. The bodies hung on the branches of the trees. They were all still alive. Soon I too would have my flesh torn asunder, and be damned to hang up there and feed the hungry willow trees. There was nothing I could do but accept my fate. The willow men had me. The thing nobody gets right about the Satanic Panic is that there were two phases. First wave dirtbags, 1978 to 1985, they were victims of the panic. They never actually messed with the occult. Black Sabbath records, role-playing games, cutting gym class. It didn't make you a wizard. Second wave dirtbags, 1985 to 1992, however, we were created by the panic. We heard that heavy metal and D&D led to black magic. And, we couldn't wait to sign up. Of course, we got into Satanism, for like a week. Then we found a copy of the Magus at Walden's Books in the mall, followed by someone's older brother telling us why Jimmy Page bought Bullskin House. Suddenly kids who couldn't pass freshman English, they were trying to decipher Aleister Crowley. Magic's an oral tradition. Heard about Robert Anton Wilson from the Weirdos at the Record Shop. Austin Alsman Spare from the hippies who sold crystals in the flea market. We were in our senior year when we heard about the Chattering Storm. Now by then my core crew was Inga, Diz, Richard, and me. Inga got hired at the hippie shop and we would hang out there and visit her. That was how we heard about the storm. From Creepy Craig, one of the regulars. Craig was maybe 30, way too excited to hang out with high schoolers. Anyway, he told us about the game, and when we were interested, he wrote down the directions with his off-kilter block letters. The instructions looked like a ransom note written by a third grader. Saturday nights were always a sleepover at Diz's house. His parents, they weren't big on rules, and we were able to keep all of our band gear in the basement, which became our rehearsal room, clubhouse, occult science lab. Scattered amongst Richard's drums and Inga's and mine's amps, were the remains of dozens of seances, rituals, Ouija board sessions. Candles, sigils, and beer cans littered the place. And we weren't doing any of it with any real intention other than trying to scare ourselves. We fell asleep to slasher movies, we woke up to Slayer, so that was increasingly hard to do. The night that we summoned the Chattering Storm was the middle of January. There wasn't much else going on. Creepy Craig's directions were detailed. Too detailed. There was no way we were going to do all these steps. The entire first paragraph was rules. Burn sage in all four corners of the room. Pass. Draw 2 protective circles, 1 salt, 1 ash, no thank you. Red, yellow, blue, and white candles burning in the 4 sacred directions. Nope. Thing is, we had the stupid candles, but the thing about dirtbags or heads, heshers, burnouts, depending on your region, is if we wanted rules, we would have played sports. The one rule we followed was the music. The game needed instrumental music. We argued over whether to use Orion by Metallica or Transylvania by Iron Maiden. We settled on playing a demo of one of our very long original songs. I wasn't thrilled with choice, as I secretly thought that the only thing our band had going for it was Inga's lyrics. Diz went first, sitting in a chair in the middle of the room, blindfolded. The rest of us sat in a semicircle around him. Diz did the singing chant, pitching his voice twice low, once high, then low again. We recited the same 4 words over and over. They looked vaguely Scandinavian written down, but spoken, they sounded like speaking backwards. According to Creepy Craig, and confirmed by some of the crystal shoppers, this should lead to the person in the chair automatically speaking in tongues, this demonic gibberish that should last 30 seconds tops. Well, that's not what happened. Diz's voice was still his, but it was like he found a different gear in his vocal cords. The first few words were gibberish, but then, in a clear, over-enunciated voice like an old-time radio announcer, he said, "The real reason Richard can't hang out on Mondays is because he goes to the church youth group. He confesses about the stuff he steals, including my landscaping money and Inga's delay pedal." We were supposed to keep chanting the whole time, but we sat there with our mouths open. By the time I finally got up and paused the stereo, Diz had moved on to what Inga did at camp. As soon as the music stopped, Diz was back to normal. And nobody was mad at him. We all just knew that that wasn't him talking. We continued, like idiots. I went next. Same thing. Chair, blindfold, chanting. And then I went away. Where my mind used to be was a torrent of pure information. I could see my friends, not just them, but their secrets, their histories, the real them, not who they presented to me. I knew I was talking, but I also knew it wasn't me. I was part of something else, and it was delicious. Inga was next, and the storm sounded different through her. Her voice was high and clear, like a song. I don't remember what she said. I only know that it was cruel and beautiful, and for those few minutes, I was terrified of her. The face that I'd known since first grade and had a tiny crush on since fifth grade was unrecognizable. The set of her jaw, the way her lips moved, it wasn't Inga. Whatever she said, it broke Richard. He ran out of the room and out of our lives. He never spoke to any of us again. Monday morning, I had an oral report in Spanish class. Well, normally I'd blow it off, but I was trying to graduate, so I put AC/DC in my Walkman and psyched myself up. I hate it when people look at me, which should have been a red flag considering I was planning on being a rock star, but I wasn't big on thinking things through. As I stood up to face the class, the normal panic wasn't there, and in the back of my head, the chords from Dirty Deeds kept playing. Something like adrenaline flooded my body, and I felt good. I didn't have to think about the words, they just flowed out in perfect, accented Spanish. I explained how Mexico is a country where they love soccer and boxing and dancing, and how our teacher recently relapsed after 3 years sober. The adrenaline was gone, and I was terrified. I tried to see my friends. I found Richard first. His locker was right by mine, but he wouldn't talk to me. The look on his face made my blood run cold. He was scared of me. I saw Diz in the cafeteria. He wasn't at the dirtbag table. Somehow he was at the center of attention at the wrestling team table. Whatever he was saying must have been fascinating. They were laughing. They were hanging on his every word. Seeing Diz as the newly crowned jock mayor freaked me out more than getting possessed in Spanish. I headed for the girls' gym. It was 5th period, so Inga should be there. And in the hallway, 2 girls that were sort of in our social circle were beating the crap out of each other. Motley Crue t-shirts were torn, hairsprayed bangs were ripped. Inga was in the crowd, with a smile that I didn't recognize. My first thought was, she did this. My next thought was, it did this. A thought in a voice that wasn't mine said, we did this. I left school out the emergency door, my heart racing, and I headed home. I could barely drive from the adrenaline shaking my hands. I was scared of my only friends. I was scared of how good I felt Saturday night. Most of all, I was scared of how that voice started murmuring in my head the second I turned on the car stereo. It was like it was feeding off the music. Feeding off how the music made me feel. Mom was in the kitchen when I got home, and it took all my willpower not to tell her all the dirty details I suddenly knew about Dad. The storm wanted to be heard. I kept my head down, and I made it into my room barely. I tried to clear my head with the only thing that ever worked. I plugged my guitar in and forced myself to practice scales for 20 minutes before opening up and improvising. My head didn't clear. It filled up again. The storm came calling again, and suddenly I was in it. I'm Apollo and Delphi. They praised me, and I gave them music and prophecy. I am Brigid, granting poetry to the Celts, the banks of the river Barrow. I am a man 5 years from now, playing to a stadium of adoring fans. This is the future if I just relax and... Trying to snap out of it. Like a combination of sleep paralysis and amnesia, my mind didn't want to remember who I am. Finally, one last burst of sheer panic jolted my body, and I shook it out of my mind. I forced myself to remember. I'm not a god. Gods don't have back acne. I'm a 17-year-old dirtbag who'll be taking Spanish in summer school. I never picked up my guitar again. It probably looked from the outside like we just drifted apart over the next few months before graduation. It wasn't gradual on my part. I loved my friends, but I didn't recognize them. The look in Diz's eyes scared the hell out of me. The look in Inga's eyes broke my heart. Richard never spoke with us again. I think he's a priest now. Diz started this conspiracy theory show on public access television when he was 18. I mean, I watched it once. It wasn't his voice. It was the storm. I assume it still is, but I can't bring myself to listen, even though he's tough to avoid these days. Inga never played stadiums, but she sold her first song right after high school and hasn't stopped quietly working in the industry since. She has a place in Malibu on the cliffs. I never heard her songs. Or anyone else's. I mean, that's what it cost me. Not only my friends, but music. All of it. I won't turn on a radio. Even now, I won't risk opening myself up to that feeling again, ever. I listen to audiobooks in the car. It isn't just the satanic panic that people got wrong. Actual deeds with the devil, those aren't what they tell you. You don't lose your soul when you die. You lose it once you're willing to lose it. That person playing the stadium would look like me, but I'd be gone. Like my friend. Lost in the chattering storm.
Hey there, kids, it's...
The stench of decay and manure saturated the hot, sticky night air, clinging to our skin like wet saran wrap as we walked down the broken sidewalk. It assaulted my senses, permeating the fabric of my clothes and mixing into the fresh sweat from our 2-mile hike. The only way to get where we were going was on foot, The unused roads had lost their battle with Mother Nature and her army of twisted roots and giant sinkholes. The streetlights tilted inward from either side of our path, like giants craning their necks to see what idiots dared to enter their smelly, forgotten domain. Even if there had been power running to them, their bulbs had long since burnt out, replaced by some kind of mossy nests that dangled from the lamp heads like shriveled fingers. The work of rodents or insects or eldritch abominations, there was no way to know which. Jerry and I were on foot, his flashlight scanning the pothole-riddled concrete. Behind us, Rosa carried her own light, while Cooper carried the conversation. "If you think this is bad, it's nothing compared to South Florida. One day, I had to trek 20 miles straight through the glades to get a job. You guys probably wouldn't have made it that far. The alligators scare most people off, but they don't bother me. Never been afraid of alligators. I guess I'm just built different." I've been silently listening to Cooper, the newest member of our crew, for some time now, long enough that I already knew everything I needed to know about him. He was the kind of guy who loved to talk about how smart he was, or how skilled he was, or how funny he was. I never once heard him tell a joke, but he regaled us with countless examples of when he was able to work a crowd and make everybody laugh. Whatever the thing was that you were just talking about, without fail, he just so happened to already be an expert in it. What a coincidence. And his IQ was, allegedly, off the charts. Cooper was, no doubt, his own greatest hype man. We picked him up in Cutoff Cove on the west banks of Oregon a week later. The cove was a quaint little seaside community with a bizarre problem. Once every year, like clockwork, the town was swallowed by a brown fog. When it subsided a few days later, things were different. According to unverified rumors, each time the fog rolled out, it took a few people with it. Yet, somehow, the disappearances were never reported. Jerry booked us a motel just outside of town, but he made the reservation on one of his Finders Keepers credit cards, and management caught on before we could even unpack our bags. Thankfully, Rosa was able to do some last-minute networking and discovered a group of vloggers who had received the same tip as us. And that's how we met Cooper. He was the founder of a group of paranormal researchers looking into the fog disappearances, and when Rosa reached out, they were more than happy to combine resources. For us, it meant a place to stay, sharing their Airbnb right on the beach, and for them, it meant Jerry cracking open his jar of artisanal weed nugs that he'd been saving for a special occasion such as this. I won't bore you with all the details of that story, but in the end, Rosa did the responsible thing and pulled public records at the county clerk's office, which is how she discovered the truth. People weren't just disappearing after each fog. Every year, the entire town, every single person, up and vanished. Then, a new town, full of new, seemingly normal people with the different names and identities and memories, took their place, and somehow, nobody had ever noticed this before. Where did the old town go each time? We'll never know. Who are all these replacement people? Beats me. Is this gonna just keep happening every year from now until the end of eternity? Shit, probably. Sometimes we're able to figure things out. Sometimes, not always. Or even able to help. But this one ended up being another L to cancel out the W's. We managed to get the hell out of Dodge once the rest of the inhabitants went into their fugue state and began trance-walking toward and into the lapping waters of the ocean, never to be seen again. Probably good, too, because the paranormal investigators saw this as their big break, got a little too close to the action, and were likewise never seen again. Except for Cooper. Frickin' Cooper. With his bleach blonde boy band haircut and gray eyes, and his smile, which he showed off constantly, a little too perfect to be natural, always wearing expensive designer polos that were a size too small. I think he thought that it would show off his muscles, but in reality it made him look like a burrito that had been wrapped too tightly. And now, the fillings were bursting out everywhere. Frickin' Cooper. The morning the fog rolled in, he was too hungover to join his buddies down by the water, and it saved his life. Of course, the way he told the story, his intuition was what kept him in bed that morning, and even though I distinctly remember Rosa being the one to throw a bucket of water onto Jerry to wake him up before corralling us all together and out the door, Cooper had thrown in quite a few self-congratulatory remarks since joining us. Things like, "Still can't believe I convinced you guys to leave when we did," or "Good thing y'all listened to me," or "My old crew got what they deserve for leaving me behind." I won't go so far as to say that the last week with him had been insufferable, but just really, really annoying. The world was full of Coopers, and as a former retail associate, I've tolerated much worse for much longer. Ironically, the thing that really bothered me about Cooper had nothing to do with him at all. The thing that crawled under my skin and made me want to explode with annoyance and barf all over his stupid face was the mind-boggling fact that the two people whose opinions I valued the most, Jerry and Rosa, actually liked the guy. They liked listening to him. They liked spending time with him. They hung on his every word enough to let him be the one to point us towards the next job. And despite all my misgivings, my perpetual anxiety, even my self-respect, or whatever you want to call it, I agreed to go with the wisdom of the majority. After all, he was the expert at the one thing none of us had any clue about: monetization. Couldn't argue with that. We were flat broke. Not a penny to our collective names. The only things in our possession worth pawning were the 48 souvenir teaspoons Jerry had stolen from each of the states we'd visited so far. Cooper was a business bro, through and through. He was the one who found and courted all of his team's sponsors, set up their streams, coded their SEO floopadoop, zoogled their whatabutts, and optimized their bleep bloop accounts. But if it sounds like I don't understand a word he was saying when he finished explaining it, that's because I don't care about any of that stuff. All I know is that there is, theoretically, a way to use the internet to turn words into food. It seemed like chaos magic to me, random and uncontrollable, but Cooper swore he had divined the algorithm for us. All we had to do was listen to him and do whatever he says. The night before the foggening, he smoked a blunt and laid out the keys to monetary success in the age of internet content. He called it the 3 S's: sensationalism, sexiness, and shit tons of output. You only need 2 of those 3 to hit it big, he said, and I used what little credibility I had as our group's founding member to veto option number 2. Regarding component number 3, output, Cooper wanted to know why I had a blog that I hadn't updated in months. I tried to explain how I didn't really have time to spend chronicling my misadventures anymore, and how I only ever really did that in the first place as a means of therapy. And to be honest, there was a strange new factor since the success of the blog from years ago. Now I was wary to post anything new for fear of not matching the perceived quality of what came before. However, I truly feared sequel creep. How the only way to preserve the dignity of what I had created was by leaving it alone. Most of all, how I didn't know if anything new would be regarded as good enough. His response to these concerns was both annoying and insightful. Nobody even knows who you are anymore, dude. The internet's attention span can only be measured in nanoseconds. You need to pivot with the new literature landscape. He advised me to forget all about the blog and instead focus on where the real money was: short-form videos and micro-vlogs, which led us to the component of success number 1, sensationalism. As Cooper put it, we could drive traffic and engagement through a number of different techniques, the easiest being something called rage bait, but I didn't have the emotional energy nor moral bankruptcy necessary for that. Instead, he suggested something a little closer to what we were already engaged in: stylized fear-mongering. And that's how we ended up here. A week later, in bumfuck Mississippi, outside of a zoo that hadn't been operational since a hurricane flooded the county somewhere back in the late 20th century. We were decked out in our best breaking and entering gear and garb, ready to video ourselves for a new YouTube channel about urban exploration. A final desperate attempt to parlay our expertise into something we could use to pay the bills. There was no tangible reason to expect things to go sideways tonight, but given our history, it would be irresponsible not to acknowledge the possibility that something horrendous and supernatural was waiting for us inside. And if that ended up being the case, Jerry would be ready to film it for those sweet, sweet internet points. Now remember, guys, Cooper said as we finally reached the exterior wall of the abandoned zoo, you want to be able to cut as many clips as possible from this. No long, meandering sentences. Looking at you, Jack. Keep it short, but not quippy. No quips, I repeated. That's right, Rosa said. Remember how those Creepcast guys hated the quips? For those of you out of the loop, she was referring to a recent review of my early blog by a couple of professional blog reviewers. They seemed to think my experience with the Dark God back at my hometown gas station a few years ago was a piece of fiction that I decided was probably for the best. Cooper continued. All right, start rolling. We each took our phones and began recording a video. Jerry, without hesitation, charged up to the 6-foot wall and scaled over it with ease. I panned my phone back to Rosa, then pointed it at Cooper. As soon as he saw me, he snatched the phone out of my hand. How many times do I have to tell you? He snapped. Portrait, not landscape. We're not Akira fucking Kurosawa, okay? This isn't a cinematic experience. Vertical video only. He gave me my phone back, and I didn't wait for a response before running and charging over the wall behind Jerry. Now it was just me and Rosa. She was looking towards where he had jumped the perimeter, smiling with something akin to admiration. The same look she had when she watched him eat, or sleep, or say stupid things that boggled my mind. When she caught my eye, she lowered her phone and asked, You good? I suddenly realized that my teeth were clenched. I relaxed my jaw and stopped the recording long enough to answer. Yeah, just... To be honest, I'm a little annoyed that we have to do this. We don't have to do this, she declared matter-of-factly. I mean, this whole thing, it's not really what we do. The breaking into spooky places, getting into stupid trouble, sure, that's our brand. There's just something inherently gross about pandering for internet engagement so the tech oligarchs will give us a turn at the revenue teat. I mean, we face down literal gods, nearly watch the world end, and I still believe there's nothing more inherently destructive to culture and society than the infinite scroll doom machine that we're currently bolstering with our own participation. I know, she said. Seems a bit egotistical to think that our contribution is going to make any difference. Maybe that's part of it too. The idea that we as individuals don't have any power to stop the monster, and if we don't dance, then we starve. Is there any ethical way to exist in this late-stage capitalistic techno-dystopian hellscape? Are we just destined to be cogs in a... Hey! I turned to see Cooper sitting on the edge of the wall, filming me. Put a cork in it, Helen Caldecott. These monkey ghosts ain't gonna film themselves. Rosa let out a short laugh as he fell off out of view behind the wall. It wasn't until a second later that I realized I was groaning involuntarily. What's wrong? I couldn't believe she, of all people, didn't know. Nothing, I said, turning on my camera, vertical mode. The Coliseum wants to watch us perform. Let's go perform. I was soon humbled to learn just how bad I am at scaling a simple 6-foot wall. Rosa and Cooper were both waiting for me on the other side, cameras rolling as I plopped, inelegantly, onto the ground. After righting myself, I took a quick head count of the group and asked, Where's Jerry? He wanted to see if there was anything cool left in the reptile house, Rosa answered. Cooper pointed at my phone and commanded, Film. I begrudgingly did as I was told. Then we were off. Cooper led the way while Rosa lagged behind with me, one hand on her flashlight and the other keeping a video record of the entire proceeding. She whispered into my ear, Oh, really? What's wrong? There was an uncomfortable and unspoken feeling between the two of us, but I'm not good at opening up, even when there isn't a video recording my every thought and action. I'd be damned before I bore my feelings into the camera just so Cooper could splice it up as drama farming, so I simply put on a fake smile and said, I got a really bad vibe about this place. Yeah, I thought, that ought to edit well into a TikTok. The walk through the abandoned zoo went about as I expected. Broken glass littered the asphalt. Doors were bolted shut. Vegetation covered every surface. Once you've seen a few dozen abandoned locations, you've pretty much seen them all. However, I did clock the absence of graffiti and lack of any signs of prior vandalism. It was almost a charming notion that we might have been the first ones to break into this place. We approached a fork in the path, the reptile house to the immediate left, clearly labeled with a giant metal snake dangling from the eave, a winding road to the right, leading to who knows where. Rosa broke from her long-standing tradition of being the voice of reason and rationality, saying, we should split up. What? I asked. You know, for the videos. Raise the stakes a bit. Cooper stopped, turned, and gave her a smirk. I like the sound of that. With 3 people and 2 possible paths, there weren't a whole lot of combinations. Of them, one sucked the most, Cooper and Rosa, going off on their own while I was left to film B-roll by myself. How about you and me stick together? I asked, trying not to sound too eager. I think our resident expert can fend for himself. She laughed and shook her head. Not exactly what I had in mind. Hey, Cooper said, giving me the disgruntled stink eye. My expertise would be wasted. I'm here to teach you guys, remember? I did not remember. In fact, this felt like the first time I had heard those words. Okay then, I said, trying for the second, least sucky combination. Let's split up by gender. Rosa, you go find Jerry. In the meantime, I'll see if there's something worth filming up in the loop. Meet back here in 10? I knew Cooper was going to protest, but before he could, Rosa said, Okay, that sounds good. Be careful, both of you. Careful, don't get the clicks, Cooper responded with a wink. As Rosa walked away, Cooper nudged me on the hip and said, Man, that chick is crazy. Come again? I'm just saying, she's been after me since Cutoff Cove. I didn't care for how chummy he had suddenly become. But I also couldn't entirely deny that Rosa had shown an attraction to him that I found completely baffling. She'd let it slip a couple of times since he joined us, like it was no big deal. She told me in passing that she thought he was cute, even when he was just acting like a complete idiot, behaving in ways that made me embarrassed for him. She would simply watch and smile, like he had some kind of spell over her. Still, it was a step too far to call my friend crazy. She's a sweet person. She's really trusting, caring. Yeah, he interrupted. She wants the D-Jack, admit it. Right. I reflectively clenched my fist. Didn't seem to notice. She strikes me as a clinger, though. Know what I mean? No. Like she'd probably start planning our wedding before I get my pants back on. Dude, I said, that's my friend you're talking about. Lighten up, he said, as if that sentence had ever accomplished its goal in the history of spoken language. Just messing around. What? Did you call dibs on her or something? What? Did I call dibs? You're not about to tell me that Pluser Jerry called dibs on her, are you? Excuse me? Pluser? It means poser and loser at the same time. See, when you mix words together like that, I know what a portmanteau is. I mean, between you and me, Jerry's a bit of a tryhard, don't you think? Like, constantly worries about what other people think. It's just so pathetic. Are we talking about the same Jerry? Suddenly, my phone started to ring. It was only at this point that I realized I'd forgotten to film anything. No matter, as far as I was concerned. The entire conversation was left forgotten. When I checked the caller ID, it said, Jesus Christ. That can only mean one thing. Jerry changed his name in my contacts again. I answered and put him on speaker. Hey man, what's up? Hey, dude. Y'all maybe want to come join us at the reptile house. We found something. Cooper and I shared a look. Okay, we're on our way. Wait, he said in an urgent voice. What is it? Rosa told me I have to do that line again. The lighting wasn't right on that take. All right, line it up from the top, okay? Hey, dude. Maybe you want to come join us? I hung up the call and started up the path to the others. The door to the reptile house was surprisingly unlocked. Cooper followed me inside through a lobby that smelled suspiciously of cinnamon, down a hallway, and into the room at the end where Jerry was still doing retakes. "We found something!" he cried in a Shakespearean affectation. "Y'all should join us!" He dropped the accent and said, "Oh, hey, Jack." Rosa lowered her phone. "You're not going to believe this." "What is it?" Jerry looked at Rosa and said, "Make sure you film the reaction shot." She aimed her camera at me as Jerry slipped up the path and went up to the doorway and flicked the light switch on. Suddenly, the room was as bright as day. Cooper immediately blurted out, "What the fuck?" "Yeah," Jerry said. "Start charging your phones, because this place has free electricity." I studied our surroundings, taking it all in, a piece at a time. This was an office of some sort. The desktop computer on the corner looked way too modern to have been around when the zoo shut down. The filing cabinets were clean. The rug beneath our feet felt bouncy and distinctly mold spore free. Finally, I asked, "Are we positive this place is abandoned?" "Oh, that was a good delivery!" exclaimed Rosa. "Put that in the preview." "We should get out of here," I said. "Yeah, I totally agree," said Jerry. "We've seen everything there is to see in this room. Now it's time to go further down the rabbit hole." "That's not what I meant." But it was too late. Jerry had already left the office. Cooper was next out, followed by Rosa. Finally, I picked up the tail of the adventuring party. By the time I reached the hallway, Jerry had already flicked on the overhead lights and begun going door to door, opening and illuminating the building one room at a time. I was already eager to pack it in and call it a day, but it wasn't until he reached the door at the very end of the hall that I realized just how much I missed the luxury of a boring life. The door didn't open. In the back of an unlocked building in an abandoned zoo in the middle of nowhere, someone took the time to lock up something. Something more valuable than computers and office equipment. Something we didn't need to discover. But as I watched Jerry bashing a fire extinguisher against the doorknob, I understood that it was too late to stop whatever was happening. It was all I could do to watch the broken lock fall to the ground. Jerry took one step back, made sure we were still filming, then charged and kicked the door wide open. Cooper scoffed and said, "I could have picked that lock in 10 seconds if I had my tools on me. No big deal." "Holy roly poly fucking cannoli! You guys!" Jerry said, half excited, half confused, half overjoyed with emotion. We followed him into the newly unlocked room, where he was facing a tableau straight from a cheap science fiction television show. There was the regular accoutrement, of course: beakers and test tubes, wires and gizmos, light panels, and stacks of paper readouts that someone much smarter than me might be able to identify. But all that was lagniappe. The focus of this room was in front of Jerry. 3 large vats of vibrant green liquid taking up the entirety of the wall. They were all wider than a phone book, with glass windows from floor to ceiling, and suspended inside each, an animal, creature, thing? I couldn't decide what to call them. They were bipedal, made of wrinkled folds of pink matter, similar in texture to raw hamburger, wider than an average human, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall. They didn't have necks. Instead, muscle tissue connected the shoulder lumps to the round, bowling ball-shaped protuberance where the face lived. No nose, just tubes connecting nasal holes to fixtures at the back of the tanks. Their eyes were shut, the mouths were widened, lipless slits, trapped in an eternal look of pure disinterest. I couldn't look away. The voice inside my head held me hostage, swearing that if I broke, if I blinked, if I breathed too loudly, the eyes on these things would pop open, and then, well, my imagination had a choose-your-own-adventure book of horrible possibilities of what might happen after that. But eventually, as these things tend to go, I began to realize that reality was no match for my imagination. If these things slept through Jerry Kool-Aid manning his way into the room and shining his flashlight right at their faces, they probably weren't going to wake up anytime soon. Jerry finally broke the silence. Is it just me, or is there something really weird about these meat golems? Ah, I said reflectively, meat golems, yeah, that's what they are! Why not? Jerry paused his long video enough to take a few selfies with the floating abominations while I took in the rest of the space. No security cameras, no guards, probably a bit too late to worry about booby traps. What do you guys think's going on here? Rosa asked. Jerry posited a theory. Is there a chance this is part of the zoo that they forgot to clear out and just been running non-stop this entire time? Anything's possible, Cooper said, contributing nothing of value to the conversation. I opened a filing cabinet and thumbed through some medical documents, observing. This part of the building feels new. It's definitely been updated and used recently. Thanks, Captain Obvious, Cooper teased. And in other news, toasters toast toast. Hey, look at this, Rosa said, pointing her flashlight at the floor next to a wall of built-in shelves packed to the brim with binders. I didn't see what the this was right away, but once I walked up to her side and leaned in, I detected the faint shape of a quarter circle in the carpet pile. Secret door? I guessed. Jerry took it upon himself to rip every single binder off the shelf until he found the one that triggered the opening mechanism. With a click, a section of wall the size of a doorway disconnected and swung outward. Okay, I said, if the meat golem tanks weren't worth hiding in a secret room, so what the hell is? Jerry grinned excitedly and peeled the door the rest of the way open. Let's go find out. Is this really a good idea? I asked. I don't want to be a wet blanket or anything, but don't we already have enough footage? I mean, let's face it, whatever's behind the door is probably going to be fucked up and dangerous. We might get trapped in there. Or worse. Rosa's response really surprised me. We'll stay here. I turned to see that she had her hand on Cooper's shoulder. He grinned at me. Huh? I asked. We'll stay and watch the door. You two go ahead. If something happens, scream for help. If we see someone trying to sneak up on your six, we'll alert you first. I couldn't help but clock the way her fingers moved on his shoulders. It was subtle, but undeniably affectionate. And no, dear reader, let me stop you right before you draw the wrong conclusion. I was not jealous. I was simply worried for my friend, the same way I'd be worried for anybody who thought Cooper was someone worth spending time in a haunted zoo with. I get that everyone has preferences, everyone has their own flavor, but nobody's flavor should be asshole. Sounds good, Jerry answered on my behalf. Before I knew it, he'd already slipped through the mysterious door. Before I followed, I looked Rosa dead in the eyes and said, Be careful. You too. I nearly busted my ass on the first step. With all the other distractions, I missed the fact that the secret door actually opened up to a set of secret stairs, descending downward to a secret cavern below the zoo. The only reason I didn't go full human slinky and hit every step on the way down was because Jerry had the wherewithal to catch me and put me back on my feet. Look alive, bro, he said. I need you conscious if you're going to film me kicking the ass of whatever basement-dwelling monster is hiding at the bottom of these stairs. Right, I said. We went the rest of the way down in silence. Not a normal silence, though. One of those extra meaningful silences, in a regular pace. A heavier than normal breath here and there. A vibe that one can't necessarily put into words, but was so palpable as to be distracting. I wasn't even looking when Jerry opened the door at the bottom. My eyes were pointing back up the steps. Jerry yanked me through the door into an enormous man-made structure. It was like an airplane hangar, complete with floodlights, shiny floors, rows and rows of concrete cylinders spaced out every 10 feet or so, stretching for miles in both directions. Along the walls, for as far as I could see, there was a series of rectangular pieces of metal, roughly the size and shape of a door, only they had no handles or hinges. A covered lamp protruded from the wall a few inches above the door. The markings on the ground made me think of traffic lines, like this was somehow what they got from one secret lab to another. whoever the hell they were. I took a few steps into the space, surprised by the unnerving absence of any echoes. "What do you think?" Jerry whispered. His voice didn't sound right. I expected some kind of reverb, but the acoustics in here were wonky, like the space was absorbing the extra sound. Maybe there wasn't anything to bounce off of. No matter how hard I squinted, I couldn't see either end of the hall. Bing! Somewhere up ahead, maybe 100 yards or so, one of the lamps above one of the rectangles lit up green. Then the rectangle beneath it started to slide upward, opening, revealing a new room. I tried to rush back the way we came, but Jerry ran past me, seeking the hiding spot behind a column. I pivoted and ran towards the column, right as he turned and ran back towards the stairway. Then we both traded spaces again. Then, in a final pathetic attempt at coordination, we collided directly into one another and collapsed onto the ground. Shit, I thought. I hope we didn't catch that on film. Up ahead, a man stepped out from the newly revealed room. He was dressed head to toe in camo tactical gear and body armor, a matching helmet strapped to his head. In his hands, an assault rifle. Had he turned even slightly, he may have seen us lying flat in the middle of the pathway. But he didn't. Instead, he just crossed to the wall on the other side, where another rectangle was opening below another green lamp. After he stepped through, both rectangle doors reclosed. Then I let out the breath I'd been holding. Damn it, I thought. Why couldn't it have been demons? Demons are easy. Not to sound too reductive, but it's true. With a few notable exceptions, demons are among the simplest encounterees we've crossed paths with. Most of the time, they can't even physically interact with our world unless they're using some host of some sort. Same argument applies to ghosts, spirits, other phantasmagoria. The thing about non-corporeal entities is that without the corporeal part, they can't really hurt you. All you need is a quick ceremony, or some holy water, or a Latin incantation, or some salt. Honestly, when you consider the number of weaknesses demons have in our world, it's a wonder they keep trying to break through. The last time we faced demons was the day of Cutoff Cove, when we were still breaking in our newest member. We dropped by a rest stop barbecue place called Sticky's. That, unbeknownst to us, had been built over the mass grave of a bunch of Spanish conquistadors. I'll just leave Jerry's Yelp review right here to serve as a testimony to how that all went down.
Food was mid. Atmosphere was out of this world. There was something otherworldly about it. Waiter was hot. Fries were cold. There was a portal to another dimension in the men's bathroom. Everyone almost died. Good ribs, though. 4 out of 7 stars.
Jerry P. Narnia, USA. It was a fast and messy episode. We had to use Rosa's legal power as an internet-ordained priestess to bless the hot sauce, which we then used to vanquish the nest of demons. When it was over, Cooper was the only one not covered in sauce and ectoplasm. He was quick to take credit for fending off the demons and protecting me from danger, but as I recall, he spent the whole time cowering in a corner whimpering. All that to say this. Demons are easy compared to most of our jobs. Maybe one day we'll encounter a demon with a gun, or maybe a rifle that's been possessed by a serial killer, but until then, a dude with an AR is probably the scariest thing that we could possibly encounter down here in this sanctum beneath the abandoned zoo. I pushed myself up. Jerry found where we'd dropped our phones and collected them, while I started back for the stairway. "Time to go," I said.
Wait just a sec.
"No, Jerry, that guy had a gun, which tells me one of two things. Either he's ready to shoot and kill trespassers, or he's carrying it around for protection from something else down here. Either way, we have all the footage we need for a decent episode, right?"
Dude, what's wrong? Jerry asked bluntly.
"There's a bunch of meatball monsters and armed guards and..."
Yeah, the guns and the spooky and the whatever. But for real though, you've been acting mopey for days now. We've been trying to give you space, thinking maybe it was just like intestinal problems or something, but clearly that isn't the case. So what's really bothering you?
I checked to make sure his camera was put away, but still didn't answer truthfully. "It's nothing."
Bruh.
Well, I couldn't argue with that. I shook my head and said, "You really can't tell." He shook his head slightly faster and said,
No.
makes it so much worse.
Dude, if I was a mind reader, I wouldn't have spent 3 months learning how to cheat at poker, now would I?
Huh?
Just tell me already, would you? It's Cooper!
I blurted out, perhaps a bit too loud. I looked back at the open door to the steps, wondering if he might have heard me, and then decided I didn't care, and added, "Obviously." Jerry's face contorted into a look of confusion.
What? Why? How is that obvious?
I find him to be obnoxious, and I don't have to like him.
No, of course you don't. However, and please don't take this the wrong way, you don't think you're being a little too hard on him? I mean, he did give us some really good financial advice, didn't he?
You mean this? Filming ourselves in hopes of getting sponsorship deals with NordVPN or Dollar Shave Club or one of those stupid fake cell phone games?
Huh? What's wrong with Dollar Shave Club? They send you high-quality razors to your doorstep every month for a fraction of the cost of traditional...
That's not the point.
Well, I would certainly hope not.
Right then I heard something coming from the hallway behind me, something that put me into a high alert. I couldn't be sure, but it sounded like a yelp of distress. I held up a hand, palm outward, the universal sign for shop for a second, and I listened. Closely. No! Stop that! It was Rosa. I raced up the stairs as fast as my body would let me. Get off of me! When I reached the top, what I saw made my blood boil. Cooper, with his arms around her, was leaning in for a kiss. I said, quit it! She reiterated with a playful giggle. Hey! I yelled. Cooper let go and took a step back and raised his hands in surrender. What do you think you're doing? Jack, she said, calm down, okay? It was only at that moment, with my heart beating loudly in my chest and the room spinning around me, that my eyes, conscious and subconscious, all caught up to one another, colliding in an awkward jumble like the Three Stooges racing to catch the same fly ball. What I was seeing wasn't what I thought I was seeing. Yeah, he had his arms around her, but she also had her arms around him. And when I came rushing into the room, she was smiling. But not anymore.
Yeah, man, Cooper repeated. Calm down, we're just messing around.
Are you okay? I asked her. She sounded surprised. You know, I was about to ask you the same question. He leaned in, resting his chin against her shoulder and locking eyes with me. She gently pushed him away and said in a soft voice, "Not now." He laughed, obnoxiously. I know I'm famously terrible at reading the room, at understanding interpersonal relationships, but this, whatever it was, made zero sense to me. And as he leaned back in to make contact with her again, I stepped forward and said, "She told you to back off."
"Oh there, cowboy,"
Cooper warned. "You don't want to come for me. I have a black belt in jiu-jitsu." Jerry finally reached the top of the steps behind me. Panting, he looked at the rest of them and asked,
"What happened?"
I tried to form a coherent answer, but with the adrenaline spike wearing off faster than I was used to, the only thing I could do was point at Cooper and say, "This asshole!" Rosa stepped towards me, took my hand in hers, and used her calm, concerned voice to say, "Take a breath. You're overreacting." Overreacting?
"Classic Jack," Cooper teased, walking up behind her. "Captain Buzzkill. This is why nobody likes you."
He put one hand around her waist and squared up right in front of me. I looked at him. Then at her. Is there actually something going on between the two of you? Huh? Rosa asked.
"Let me take this one, babe,"
Cooper said. "Jack, I'm going to explain this in a way you'll understand. We're all getting kind of sick of you. Always whining and moping and using weird French words like portmanteau to try and sound smart. And frankly, there's no need for two alpha males in the pack, so why don't you do the honorable thing and leave? We're just... How do I put this? We're better off without you." I counted to 5. That was more than enough time for the others to step in, say or do something. But they didn't. They let those words linger in the air like they weren't devastatingly calculated to make me feel worthless. 5 seconds was about all I could stand. With tears welling up in my eyes, I decided that if they weren't going to say something in 5 seconds, it was too late. The damage was done, and now it was up to me to make the next move. Well, I started. That's a pretty bold proclamation for someone within smacking distance. I pulled my hands free from Rose's, reared back, and swung at his face as hard as I could. Of course, the problem with announcing your intention beforehand is that it really telegraphs the whole next move. Cooper was able to dodge my fist easily. The others both screamed at me to stop, but in that moment, I didn't care. I lunged at him and tried again, and he dodged again. I kept swinging, and he kept maneuvering, and then, right when I started losing steam, Cooper turned back the way he came and raced down the hallway and out of the door. After all the bluster, he really was just a coward. Good thing, too, because I probably would have lost that fight.
What the ugly duckling are you doing?
Rosa screamed.
You scared him off.
Exactly, I said, pretending that was my plan all along. Jack, Jerry said, using his dad voice, the one he rarely used in moments of seriousness. You gotta go find him and apologize.
Why should I apologize? He's the one who sucks.
Rosa pointed after him.
He might get hurt out there on his own. I don't care, I screamed. I don't want him in our group anymore. He's an abusive, selfish, mean asshole. Why am I the only one who sees that? No, seriously, please explain it to me. Ever since he joined up with us, it's like the two of you have been enamored with him or hypnotized. Is that it? Does he have some kind of weird mind control thing going on? Please tell me, because that would make so much more sense.
The man in tactical gear cleared his throat. He was the same soldier we'd seen earlier, now standing in the secret doorway. At least, I assumed it was the same soldier. He was wearing the same uniform, and he had the same gun. Only this time his finger was tense on the trigger. Oh, that's right, I thought to myself. Probably not a good idea to be screaming so loudly at a time and place like this. You done? The soldier asked. I looked back at the direction where Cooper had fled, but he was long gone. When I looked back at the soldier, there was 2 more men dressed just like him, rushing through the secret doors. Hey there, I said, searching for anything that resembled a good idea. I'm glad we found you. We were just looking for the bathroom. Maybe you could point us in the right direction? It was a bold gambit that, unsurprisingly, didn't work. First, they searched us for weapons. After collecting our cell phones and Jerry's 10 different pocket knives, they marched us down the stairs at gunpoint. As soon as the 3 of us were back in the underground garage, they smashed our phones to pieces. Great, I thought. Now, if we survive, the only way anyone's going to know our story is if I write a blog post, and nobody's going to think it's real. They lined us up against the wall and instructed us to keep our hands up and mouths shut. I didn't know if any of you have ever had to keep your hands in the air for more than 5 minutes, but there comes a point where you start to wonder if it would be easier to just let them shoot you. Finally, after what it felt like ages, we discovered what they were waiting for. A golf cart whirred up the hallway, closing the distance at 10 miles per hour. When it finally came to a stop in front of us, I was surprised by the appearance of the man driving. Whatever this group was, they were clearly disciplined, trained, and well-funded. Mr. Golf Cart looked like a cartoon character come to life. Safety goggles pressed back his wild hair. A short, patchy beard poked out of his face like cotton candy. He wore a lab coat, khakis, and a white button-down shirt that was only half tucked in and spotted with ink stains. When he disembarked his vehicle, the 3 other men snapped to attention and saluted him. He returned the gesture half-heartedly, then looked at us. And who are these lovely intruders? One of the men barked back, Civilians, sir. How did they get past the locked door? Jerry answered, Door was already busted open with a fire extinguisher when we got here. The scientist grunted. Fascinating. Thanks, Jerry responded. You too. The man grinned. Jerry grinned back.
And not for the first time tonight, I found myself confused and scared and wondering, is there something going on between the two of you? Well, the scientist said, hop on! I'll give you a tour of the facility. That will explain everything. I'm not getting on that thing, Rosa said. I echoed her sentiment. Me either. I know how this works. You take us deeper into the place and we'll never get out.
I'll do it, Jerry offered, but only if I get to drive.
The walking, talking mad scientist caricature ran a hand through his beard, studied each of our faces for a few seconds, then opened a compartment in the back of the vehicle and pulled out a plain white backpack. We watched as he unzipped the pack, dug around inside, and retrieved a device that I wish I didn't recognize. Wait, I said immediately. I changed my mind. But it was too late. He shot all three of us, in turn, with a tranquilizer gun.
The world was transformed. There were no people anymore. None alive, anyway. Only me and the oceans of bone. Stacks, piles, mountains. They covered every inch of the planet, as far as I could see, as long as I traveled. I stayed away from the cities when I could. They were buried. Towers of ivory blocked out second, third, fourth-story windows. In places, they swallowed entire buildings. They could swallow me, too, if I wasn't careful. I kept to the back roads where the bone piles were closest to Earth, where I could still see the tops of vehicles, where rows of trees pointed me down paths that existed long ago. Highways, towns, farms. The countryside was desolate, but I never felt alone. Maybe it was insanity creeping in through my psychic wounds. Maybe it was the ghost of untold legions populating the space, watching me. The lone survivor. The outsider in the apocalypse. Or maybe it was all those eyes, hollowed out pairs of darkness with their smiling faces staring up at me from the ground as I tread over what was left of mankind. Thousands of them, millions of them, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. More. More. Always more. Staring at me in screaming silence. I didn't know where I was going until I saw it in the distance, rising out of a giant mountain of white. It beckoned me to continue beyond the point where hope had disappeared and survival instinct had given way to madness. It was my only purpose, to reach the obelisk at the top of the summit. And when I finally reached my destination, I realized with horror and fascination that the structure was eerily familiar and undeniably man-made. The column, wider than an ancient sequoia and stretching 100 feet into the air, was made of hard plastic. There were words carved into the side, words I couldn't read. I couldn't read them because I couldn't read anything in this universe, because as many of my sleep doctors had told me before, you can't read anything in your dreams. So without the benefit of knowing the true names etched into the side, I'll fill in this part with my best guess. Bear in mind, these names are 100% fictional and made up, and in no particular order. Spacey Trash Panda, X, Amanda Maelstrom, Dev, 0132132, Cece, Pohili 83, Nick H, Simon Bears, Amy Helps, Genghis Dawn, Genkenzi, X-Files Sir, Tyler Martin, M. Rifton, Daniel Bowles, CNB, Taff, Atrophic, Schlordas, Katie, Minky, Ariel, Catnip 411, Himbo Jerry, Jude Gulk, Aditi, Daniel Griffin, Arbitrary Handle, Dressic, Ride and Die, Villicus, Mikey, Raccoon Kaiju, Lauren Kane, and Steve. What could these names possibly mean, I wondered. Was this a memorial of some sort? I couldn't guess, but somehow I understood that without the people named here, I wouldn't have made it this far. They had my full gratitude for whatever it was they'd done. Okay.
What in the unholy nightmare shit is this?
I turned to see that I was no longer alone with the ghosts. Another individual had appeared out of nowhere. I would have been surprised if that emotion hadn't left me long ago, burned out from overuse.
Hey, I said, who are you? Jesus Christ!
He yelled, looking around us. I doubt that, I said. Everyone knows Jesus was Middle Eastern.
No, Jack?
Also not true. I'm Jack. We can't both be Jack. After a few more long seconds of watching him fumble about, trying to find balance in the bone ground, the answer presented itself to me all on its own. This was the man, or demigod, or trickster, or ghost, or whatever else it might have been, that I'd encountered ever so briefly another lifetime ago, at a small diner in the middle of nowhere. He showed off an impossible ability to freeze time. Also, he could offer an unsolicited warning about where my travels might take me. So much for that.
You were the nerd from Gilligan's Place, I said.
Yeah, he responded, struggling to stay upright.
We never got properly introduced. My name is
The tip of his boot caught inside the mouth of a skull as he tried to step forward. Immediately, he fell over and crashed into the pile.
What are you doing here? I asked.
He sat up and looked around.
Why are there so many skulls?
I shrugged. Beats me. Entire Earth appears to be covered in skulls, which really begs the question, where are all the rest of the bones? I've been hiking for eons, and I haven't seen one femur, one collarbone, one rib, nothing, just skulls. I mean, when you think about it, the marvel of engineering that is piling up all these skulls pales in comparison to the feat of disposing of the rest of the skeletal remains.
What?
He asked, exasperated. Sorry, I said. I haven't talked to anyone in a while, so these thoughts have been simmering. What brings you here, Em?
That's not my whole name.
I don't care.
Well,
he said, on shaky legs and looking around.
I just wanted to check in. Last time we spoke, it seemed to me like you were preparing to return to your hometown.
Yeah, I said, nodding. You told me not to.
Right,
you said, hesitantly returning my nod.
And then it looks like you didn't.
No, of course we didn't. You told us not to.
Yeah, but I guess I wasn't actually expecting you
to heed the advice of someone who can freeze time? I asked. Are you kidding?
What do you think I am, an idiot? A glutton for punishment? You said to stay away, so I did. Now you're here to criticize me?
Just then, I felt the cold, heavy rain begin to fall from the sky. I knew what this meant, but he didn't. It was early in my adventure here that I learned how to stay alive. Key was keeping my head above the pile. I fashioned a pair of snowshoes out of a couple of tennis rackets and some twine. I lifted my prosthetic leg and showed the man the specific footwear attached to the end. You might want to try something like this before... It was too late. The reaction had already started. Water and dirt turned to mud, water and fire turned to smoke, water and skulls turned into... something similar to a ball pit from a children's play place. Only way less gross. He sank to his knees as the falling water increased into a torrent.
Jack, he screamed, you're so...
He sank to his chest.
Frickin'...
He sank to his chin.
Weird!
He slipped below the surface. Right then, I heard another sound. I turned to see the obelisk of plastic was moving, lifting, rising out of the ground. I braced for the skullavalanche that rushed in every direction from it, pelting me with bone and teeth. But I couldn't look away. Couldn't take my eyes off of it. The tower rose further and further, blocking out what was left of the sky. The dark green plastic in this scale revealed a new shape. Curvatures too subtle to see from up close, and with a loud crash, the largest section of the gargantuan object burst from the ground. I was falling into the empty chasm it left behind, but still, I couldn't look anywhere but up. All I could do was watch. The newest piece was wider at the bottom, a rectangular shape with rows of shimmering metal plates, bladed edges that glimmered in the rain as it levitated with the rest, floating into the sky. As I fell, my feeble mind began to comprehend the entirety of the object. The shape I recognized as a giant disposable razor. And then I heard the voice booming inside my head, a titan screaming the words. Dollar Shave Club. Use promo code SkullWorld at checkout for 15% off your first month's box. Skulls collapsed around me as I sank into my grave. And all I could think was that 15% off doesn't really seem like all that great a deal to me. When I opened my eyes, I was met with a splitting headache. My brain felt 3 sizes too big for its cage. My bones hummed. My blood hurt. It was about all I could do to keep my dinner inside my stomach. I couldn't tell how far we were from where we started. This was definitely still the underground hangar. The only thing different about it now was all the bodies. There were dozens of them down here with us, leaning against the columns, sprawling out on the floors, shoved against the walls, naked, pink-skinned humanoids. The meat golems. It was hard to know for sure just how many of them were down here because, as I had just realized, I was tied in place with my back against one of the concrete cylinder columns. "He's awake," Rosa said. Across from me, about 10 feet away, Jerry was yawning. He too was sitting with his back against a column, tied in place. Caddy corner was Rosa, likewise bound. The 3 of us were in a triangle facing one another but separated, and in the center of the triangle, another meat golem, face down and immobile. "What happened?" I asked. Bing! The sound came from the lamp, which was now lit green, above the metal rectangle in the wall to my left. It rose with the speed of a garage door, slowly revealing the man who had shot us earlier. When the doorway was fully clear, he proceeded into the room, carrying something that resembled an oversized briefcase in one hand. There was a white cloth covering all but the handle grip. He whistled as he took his spot at the column directly opposite Rosa. There, he set down the sheet-covered item, then turned to face us. "How are we all feeling?" he asked. Jerry shrugged. "Not too bad." "A little groggy," Rosa said. My answer was the outlier. I feel like day-old death after it's been reheated in the microwave. The scientist flinched when I spoke. "You're awake again?" "Again?" "Yeah, you kept screaming about Skull World. We had to shoot you 6 more times just to tie you up. These tranks are designed to drop a charging elephant. You should be in a coma right now. How are you even alive?" "It's a long story." "You know you bit one of the soldiers." Jerry snickered and gave me a good job head nod. "Why are we here?" Rosa demanded. The scientist relaxed into a smile. "I'm sure you've got a lot of questions, as do we. I've convinced the others to let you live, but only as long as you cooperate. First things first. Who else knows you're here?" This was shaping up to be another classic interrogation. The correct answer to all these questions was going to be whatever gave them a reason to not kill us. "Joe," said Jerry. "Joe? Joe who?" the man asked. "Joe Mama?" "And where might I find this Joe Mama?" He really didn't seem to get the joke. Jerry kept going. "He lives down in Ligma." "Ligma?" the scientist repeated. "Where is that?" "Let me just stop you both right there," I said. I knew if I didn't interrupt the joke, we'd be here all night, or until the scientist snapped and killed us, whichever came first. You're not going to get any useful information out of him. He suffers from a mental condition that makes him unable to recall any specific information about anything. In fact, if you let him go right now, he'd forget all about this before he reached the exit. Poor thing. We're always so worried about him. Jerry played along, smiling wide and letting drool spill out of his mouth as he looked at me and said, "Who are you? Where am I? What does the fox say?" The scientist chuckled. "While I applaud the Hail Mary maneuver, it isn't going to work. We already know exactly who you are. The United States' dossiers on all 3 of you." He approached me first, sized me up, and said, "Jack Townsend, mentally troubled man with a shady past." "That's a bit of an oversimplification," I mumbled. He kept going, walking up to Jerry and saying, "Jeremy Pascal, presumed dead, former cult leader / adult film star." "Perfect," Jerry said. "That's me distilled into 9 words." He approached Rosa next.
Rosa Vasquez. Actually, you don't have anything out of the ordinary in your file. I'm wondering, how did you end up with these hooligans? The United States? Rosa replied. So this is some kind of secret government facility? Oh man, did you hear that, Jack? The Creepcast guys are going to absolutely love this part.
Not necessarily, I responded. They really hate slow vanilla reveals.
Oh, that's right, she said. But you can probably just, leave out all the boring stuff when you write about it later, right?
I shook my head. It just doesn't work that way. Yo! Jerry yelled, getting everyone's attention. If you're gonna kill us, would you at least tell us what the hell's going on here first? The mad scientist laughed to himself as he finished walking the circle, ending right back where he started, next to the small case under the white sheet. Then he did that thing that mad scientists are wont to do. He monologued.
My name is Dr. Gordon Orson, and I was hired by your government to fight a secret war you people don't even realize is occurring. There's a cultural shift underfoot. China, Russia, all the superpowers have been experimenting with this technology for decades. But it wasn't until recently that the new arms race, one the likes of which our planet has never seen, really began. The world is changing whether we're prepared for it or not. But it was Thailand, of all countries, that launched the first attack. And then, in turn, Scotland entered the battlefield.
Wait, I said. Surely you're not talking about...
Of course I am, he exclaimed.
At this point, he bent down and ripped the sheet off of the kennel cage, and now we could all see the tiny creature waddling back and forth in the most adorable way possible.
Aww,
said Rosa involuntarily. She couldn't help herself. The power of its cuteness was too overwhelming. Fuck, said Jerry. What a shitty time to not be recording for social media. I looked at Gordon in disbelief. Then I looked back at the creature. Then back at Gordon.
A baby hippo?
I asked. Jerry corrected me. Actually, dude, I think it's a baby pygmy hippo.
You fools! Shouted Dr. Gordon. There's no such thing as a pygmy hippo. You think God in his infinite wisdom would create such a stunted beast? No, this was the work of science, commitment, obsession.
Our tax dollars hard at work, I muttered. That, Jerry added, is precisely why I don't pay taxes.
Can I pet him? Rosa asked. You still don't get it, do you?
Cried Gordon, growing increasingly manic and unhinged with each passing second.
This chimera is an intricately woven masterpiece of what shouldn't be but is. I had to patch the amino acids together myself using DNA samples from vampire bats, mosquitoes, sharks, piranhas, dinosaurs, and at least one serial killer. The result was this: a perfect apex predator. A brand new species. I call them the Horus.
I rolled my eyes. You named the species after yourself? Aw, Jerry said, walking towards the tank. Look at him, his little snoot. Someone wants a boopin'. The scientist continued.
The first few experiments were total failures, but then this little girl came along and I knew she was special the moment her egg hatched. And not just because her skin was several shades darker than the rest of her siblings. I instantly looked at her and I said, well, that's an horse of a different color.
Rose's cuteness confusion broke. She looked back at the scientist and screamed,
No, don't say that! The Creepcast guys are going to shit a brick!
What about the meat golems? I asked. Why are there so many of them? Are they going to wake up and murder us or what?
Don't worry about them, he answered. They're unfeeling, unsentient bodies of muscle tissue and meat. They serve two functions. The first is so we can harvest stem cells and organs from a living colony. And the second? Isn't it obvious? The Horus have magnificent appetites. They need food. And, well, they're carnivores. You three are about to be the first of many to witness the strength of these creatures. Their potential for destruction. I coined a phrase for it that I am actually quite pleased with. Would you like to hear it?
The three of us answered at the same time. We all answered differently. No. Yes.
Is it gonna be a pun? I call it he said, pausing for emphasis. Horsepower. You son of a bitch, Rosa shouted. I'll kill you! With that, Dr. Orson unlatched the pygmy hippo's cage. It immediately sprang into action, busting the door open and galloping adorably to the meat golem in the center of us. I watched with morbid fascination and horror as the tiny 5-pound-looking hippoling went to town. Its appetite was voracious, like a little demon Pac-Man. It chomped, chomped, chomped until there was nothing left of the body but crumbs.
God damn, Jerry shouted. I guess she really was hungry.
Why? I lamented. Why couldn't it have just been demons? Rosa shot Gordon her best judgment stare and said, So you created those poor creatures just so they can be dissected and eaten? With a smile, Gordon explained, It's actually the most humane thing we could do. They don't have minds, you see. Their brains are the size of marbles, operating only at the minimum level to keep a circulatory system running. Otherwise, they're husks. The late, great French philosopher Descartes was the one who said, I think, therefore I am, and if that's true, then these creatures are not. Forgive me, I would have explained what they were before I introduced you to my creation, except... well, he chuckled to himself before finishing the thought. That would have been putting Descartes before the horse. Rosa actually managed to work off one of her shoes, which she then kicked at the scientist. It nearly whizzed past his head by a matter of inches. The horse turned in a circle a few times, then plopped onto its side and closed its eyes. Gordon started back towards the open door he'd come from. Well, it's been an interesting experience. Should be happy your deaths won't be for nothing. The immobile meat men are one thing, but I can't wait to see just how effective the horse are at devouring a more tactical prey. As he walked past the doorway, I looked back and yelled, Are you seriously going to leave us in here with this thing? Oh, no, you don't understand, he responded, as the door slowly closed. He finished his thought. I'm seriously going to leave you in there with hundreds of those things. The door closed. The green light went off. Then, bing! The light over the next door flashed on, except this one was red. It slowly began to open. Bing! Then another. Bing, bing, bing. Oh, shit. Bing, 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 bing. I could see the horse waddling into the space, congregating, joining forces into a mob that pitter-pattered together, closing in on the smell of food, and I could hear them crunching into the golems, munching the bodies, fighting each other over the limited resources. And then they were closing in. Jerry struggled fiercely against the ropes, but it was no use.
Guys, he said, I know it's bad luck to say this, but I might not get out of here alive. Any last words just in case?
I'm really sorry I've been such a downer the last week, I said. Yeah, what's up with that? Rosa asked as the hippos devoured the last of the easy meals. I sighed and explained. I just think that Cooper's a huge piece of shit. Rosa's reaction was sharp and immediate. What the fork? Why would you want to spend your last moments alive saying something awful like that?
Yeah, man, Jerry added. It's weird that you let him get under your skin so much. Time to let it go.
I can't help it, I said. I'm pissed that he's probably out there filming something that's going to get him rich, while we're in here about to be horse feed.
No, he's probably dead,
Jerry responded. Well, I thought, I guess I could take some comfort in that. You're right, I conceded. I'm sorry. This might be the gallon of elephant tranquilizers talking, but I love you guys, and I guess I thought that maybe y'all were replacing me, and as far as replacements go, I feel like you could have done a lot better, because the truth is, you look to your friends in times of uncertainty to help make sense of the world, and it's deeply unsettling to learn that your peers have such wildly differing opinions about someone who you know is just the worst kind of person, and when oh my god, one of them is biting me! An Orsling was chomping down on my leg. I braced for the pain, but it never came. Instead, the creature backed up, shook its head, and pounced again, taking my leg into its tiny, powerful, flapping jaws, shredding my jeans in the process until the only thing that showed was Metal. Oh, right, I remembered. I was already dispossessed of that leg in an unrelated accident. As luck, if you want to call it that, would have it, the not hippo had bitten into my prosthetic limb first, the choice it seemed to be regretting. But it wouldn't be long before the rest of them reached me, and then Rosa and Jerry. They were all closing in fast. I was out of ideas. Out of hope. Almost out of time. Surprise, motherfuckers! And just like that, I realized things really could get worse. The obnoxious battle cry came from the idiot running up next to me. He punted the baby hippo on my leg with enough force to send it flying. The other animals froze at the sight of him. "I came here to take names and kick horse," said Cooper, bluff charging at the creatures. They immediately spun around and ran in the opposite direction. I stole a look at Rosa's direction. She seemed positively elated to see him. I guess we're okay with puns now. "Yes!" she shouted. "I knew you'd come back!" Jerry did a little dance, or at least he did the best version he could while completely tied to a column, and cheered Cooper on with, "That's my dog right there!" Cooper raced around in the circle. Somehow, just the sight of him was enough to make the horse turn tail and run. Whatever supernatural charm powers he had seemed to cross the interspecies barrier. Whatever. Not my preferred savior, but I guess it beats getting eaten alive by piranha hippos. And then, the most unexpected and horrendous thing happened. Cooper fucking peed on me. "What the unholy fucking shit, dude?" I screamed. Jerry and Rosa laughed. "Calm down," said Jerry. "He's just marking you so the horse know you belong to him." "How is this even reality?" I screamed. "I can understand the monster swarm of government-engineered pygmy hippos, but you three are acting so fucking weird!" Almost as if to demonstrate my point, Cooper got down on all fours and started biting at the ropes around Rosa. "I mean, look at him! What is he even doing now?" "He's trying to free me," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Jerry spoke next. He sounded embarrassed. "Oh my god, you guys, I'm so sorry, I just remembered. I do actually have another pocket knife. They missed this one in my boxers. I think if I could just shift slightly, I might be able to reach it." He grunted and shifted. "Why bother? Just let Cooper untie you," I said. Jerry stopped struggling. He and Rosa shared a confused look. "What?" I asked. "What is it?" Rosa was the one to answer. "Jack, why do you keep talking about Cooper like he's here with us?" I looked at Cooper. He didn't acknowledge the conversation at all. "Because he is?" They shared the same look again. "Isn't he?" The horse swarm had regrouped. The circle was closing in. Cooper ran at them. Their perimeter fell back each time he charged, but not quite as quickly as before, like they were getting braver. Or maybe hungrier. Cooper's intimidation factor was wearing off quickly, and the circle was shrinking. It wouldn't be much longer before the bubble popped, and we were overrun. "Jack!" Rosa shouted. "I think we've had a tragic breakdown in communication over the last week, and we all need to own our parts of it, but right now, we need to stay sane long enough to escape from certain death." "Understood," I said. "I'm ready to ignore my perceived reality long enough to fight another day. But when this is over and the dust is settled, I will have so many questions." "Yeah, yatta!" Jerry exclaimed, jumping up and away from the column and the severed rope, holding his pocket knife triumphantly in the air like Lady Liberty's torch. As he went to retrieve Rosa's lost shoe, one of the horse broke from the front line and raced up to him. Jerry immediately sent it flying like a kickball. "Oh man," Jerry said as he raced over to cut Rosa free. "They're so cute, I almost feel bad about this." The word "almost" was quite the load-bearing adverb, considering he totally punted a few more of them on his way to remove my binds. Once the four of us were up and moving together, I finally saw just how many of these things were down here. Hundreds. Maybe thousands of vicious, precious baby monsters, snortling, waddling, flapping their mouths open and shut like a Langolier feeding frenzy. I also saw something else amongst the sea of horse. "There!" I pointed. About 20 yards ahead. The golf cart. "Don't worry," Cooper declared. "I'll clear us a path." I couldn't believe it. He charged into the thick blanket of Horus, waving his arms and screaming. Even more surprising, they actually got out of the way. The swarm parted like the Red Sea. I had to give credit where it was due. That was enormously brave and effective and stupid. We followed closely, quickly. The creatures nipped at our heels, but we managed to stay just out of biting range long enough to pile into the motorized vehicle. Rosa and Jerry fell into the front. He took the wheel, while Cooper and I secured ourselves in the back-facing seats. "Hold on!" Rosa shouted. Jerry cranked the battery-powered engine and kicked the golf cart into gear, speeding us through the swarm at a relaxed 5 miles per hour. Bump, 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 bump. The cart shook back and forth like we were off-roading with a broken suspension. Jerry beeped the horn, but it didn't really do much. The only option was to drive forward and try not to think about how many monster babies we squished along the way. In a matter of minutes, the bumping stopped, and we hit solid pavement. Then the vehicle climbed up to a much more cruisy speed of 10 miles per hour. I watched the horse horde shrink as the distance between us grew. I didn't know where we were going. I was happy to finally be putting some distance between us and them. If sleep were an option, I probably would have passed out right then and there. "What now?" Rosa asked.
"Now we drive until we see an open door," Jerry answered.
"What if we never find an open door?"
"Then we drive until the battery dies."
He didn't speak again until a couple minutes later when he said,
"Huh, that's weird."
I turned to my seat to get a good look. It was a subtle distinction in the otherwise continuous corridor, but it became clearer as we approached. There was a clear angle in the wall, a break from the flatness, somewhere between a forced left turn and a left veer, and then the hall continued. A couple minutes later, we encountered another. A couple minutes later, it happened again. We were all pretty tired and worn out and focused on finding a single open door amidst the monotony of closed doors, so when we came upon the next angle, none of us were really doing the math. It wasn't until the 5th angle in our path that any of us realized we'd actually just driven in an enormous circle. If you really want to be pedantic, a 540-degree self-enclosed shape is technically a pentagram, but the important thing to note was that we were right back where we started. As soon as we took that last angle, we saw rows of open doors. We also saw one of the 3 soldiers from before, except instead of a gun, he was armed with a push broom. When we came upon him, he was sweeping the bodies of flattened hippos into a big bloody pile. The soldier looked quite surprised to see us back again so soon. He blinked at us, then turned his head. We followed his gaze to the wall where he had propped up his assault rifle. We were all about the same distance from the weapon, a 20-yard dash approximately the length of a bowling lane, and the first one to the finish line might be the last one standing. That's when the battery on the cart finally died.
"Cheese it!"
Jerry shouted, leaping out of the driver's seat and racing for the closest open door, the opposite direction from the gun. Rosa jumped off after him. The soldier was already sprinting full speed before the handle of his broom clacked against the floor, but he wasn't going for an interception. He was running away from them. He was going for the weapon. Jerry and Rosa looked like they had a shot of escape, but it would be close. Me and my bum leg, on the other hand, I knew I didn't stand a chance, so I ran the odds and settled on my new strategy. If I could charge the man before he could aim down his sights, it might give my friends an extra second or two to get out in time. "Keep going!" I shouted, rushing away from them to the same destination as the man in tactical gear. Short of an absolute miracle, I wasn't going to walk away from this. But then, out of nowhere, Cooper zoomed past me. He was hoofing it faster than any human I'd ever seen. As soon as the soldier bent down to retrieve his weapon, Cooper pounced and ferociously sank his teeth into the man's jugular. Blood sprayed in every direction as the man flopped to the ground, scream gurgling and trying to push Cooper away. The struggle only lasted for a few seconds before the man went limp. Quiet. "Jack!" Jerry screamed from behind me. I turned to see him standing in the open doorway, throwing something over his shoulder and waving for me to come in. I didn't have time to properly process whatever the fuck that was. I just turned and ran. Did Cooper just... The door led to another set of stairs. Jerry saw that too, right? I mean, I didn't imagine that. Those stairs led to another lab full of full meat golems. That was not normal. We should not normalized that kind of behavior. The lab led to another abandoned zoo building, the monkey house, which led us out into warm night air. Somehow Cooper caught up with the rest of us at a flash, blood smeared all over his smiling face, and then we ran back the way we came. On the way to the wall, I noticed exactly what Jerry had grabbed from the underground room. It was a scientist's white backpack. The one from the golf cart. There wasn't any time to ask about it, though. We needed to escape and sort out all the facts later. We leapt over the wall, hit the other side, then finally took a collective breath of relief. We'd done it. We survived the zoo. We took the first mile back in silence. Jerry and Rosa watched the path for potholes and other tripping hazards. It was harder to see without flashlights. The moon gave us just enough to go off of. Cooper walked next to me, his face coated with drying soldier blood. I kept waiting for someone else to say something, but at long last I was the one to break. He'd saved my life. Maybe it was time to show some grace. I guess I owe you an apology, Cooper. You saved our lives back there. Rosa stopped walking so suddenly I collided with her. She turned around and glared at me. Okay, that's it. Stop, everybody. We gotta hash this out right now. Nothing to hash out, I said. I apologize. We're cool. Right, Cooper? Jerry tucked his thumb beneath the straps of his newly acquired backpack, crinkling his nose at me, and asked, So, is Cooper here with us right now? I returned his look of confusion, darted my eyes between the three of them, and waited to see if Cooper was going to respond. He didn't. Yes? I answered. And how long has Cooper been with us? Rosa asked. Ever since we left the cove? Cooper bit his lip. Geez, this is about to get awkward. Rosa shook her head. No, Jack. We left Cooper at the Airbnb, remember? He said he was too hungover to get out of bed. I did remember that. But then he was there in our group. They had been interacting with him this whole time. I couldn't have imagined that. Okay, Jerry added. Where is he now, exactly? He's right there. I pointed at Cooper. Jerry gave me a look that I can only describe as cautiously optimistic. Ah, he said. Let the record reflect that Jack is pointing at our dog, Gaston. What? I looked at Cooper. Blonde hair, gray eyes, 6 feet tall. Cooper. And then it hit me. Cooper was a douchey tech bro. How the hell did he know who Kurosawa and Helen Caldecott were? How did he know that the creatures were called the Horse when he wasn't there for the explanation? Where the hell was Gaston this whole time? The last place I remembered interacting with Gaston was... Oh, shit. A week ago, after we left the cove. Gaston was with us when we went to Sticky's barbecue, and... It all came flooding back to me. The barbecue place was infested with demons. We vanquished them, then fed them to Gaston's spirit void. I thought Rosa got them all with her holy hot sauce, but it seemed that one of them was a bit of a clinger. Not to get too technical, but here's what we figured out must have happened. The demon got caught halfway between our world and the spirit world inside of the dog. Turns out, demons are a lot like turds. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 flushes to get them all the way down. Gaston had been semi-possessed for the last week by an entity that manifested in my mind as the most recent annoying person I'd encountered. And even though Gaston looked perfectly normal to everyone else, I was seeing him as Cooper, and he was feeding off my negative energy. Suddenly, a lot of things made a lot more sense. So when Gaston was jumping all over me and tried to lick my face, Rosa said through a laugh of pure relief, you thought it was Cooper? Jerry laughed along. And when I let Gaston sit on my lap and eat french fries out of my mouth, mama bird style to baby bird style, you thought I was letting Cooper eat fries out of my mouth? I told you guys, I thought you were acting weird. Oh, Jerry snapped his fingers. At that time,
Gaston shit in the back of the van. You thought Cooper shit in the back of the van.
Rosa chimed in. No wonder you're freaking out so much about that. I know, right? I laughed, barely holding back tears. You guys acted like I was being crazy. Sometimes laughter is the best medicine. And we all had a good hearty chuckle when we finally figured it out. Well, all of us except the demon, who begged me not to send him the rest of the way to the void. But that's just what demons do. We took a moment or so we could bless a nearby puddle, then doused our dog in the holy water, sending the Cooper imposter demon the rest of the way out of our realm. I felt better instantly. To celebrate, I gave Gaston a big hug, and even let him lick my face. I'm really happy it worked out, but don't forget, Rosa cautioned, he's still covered in stagnant water and human blood. I don't even care, I said. I'm just so happy things are back to normal. Except for, the part where we're all broke. With an ominous smile, Jerry announced,
I might have something to help with that.
Oh? Asked Rosa.
Yeah, I took a little souvenir from Dr. Gordon's golf cart.
With that, he slid one arm out of the backpack strap and spun it around. Well. I was wondering where my bag went. The voice from the tree line caught us all off guard. We turned to see that this entire celebration had been premature. Dr. Gordon, the Orseman Orson, was standing there pointing a gun at us. Not a tranquilizer gun, an honest-to-goodness Glock. His white coat was smeared red with fresh blood. The look at his face was somewhere between bemusement and rage. How the hell did you beat us here? Are you serious? He answered. I have an underground city and so many golf carts. I've been waiting for you next to your car for half an hour. I got bored and came to find out what was taking so long. I explained, well, our dog had a half-demon stuck in him. Dr. Gordon took a long, deep breath through his nose, then asked, What? And Jerry reiterated,
What part of our dog had half a demon stuck? Don't you understand?
Never mind, the scientist said. I'm just gonna kill you.
Wait, Jerry shouted, unzipping the bag. You can't shoot us.
Why not, Mr. Pascal?
Because I have some very important information you'll want to hear.
You're stalling.
No, I'm not. I can prove it.
Fine. What's the information?
First, you want to know where I heard this information.
I haven't got all night.
Came from an extremely reliable source.
Oh, God. I thought, is this going where I think it's going? Rosa! A whisper yelled. Cover your ears! What source? The scientist asked impatiently. Where did this information come from? Jerry reached into the backpack, looked up, and said,
Straight from the horse's mouth.
With that, he pulled out the still sleeping horse creature. Dr. Gordon lowered his weapon and shrieked, My baby! Catch! Jerry yelled, tossing it into the air. In the half-second between the moment it was airborne and the moment it latched onto the mad scientist's face, the pygmy hippo awakened and went into full feeding mode. The scientist screamed and tried to grab it off, but the horse made quick work of its creator, munching away through his skin and bone and brain. By the time the scientist's body landed, the hippo had already consumed his entire head. Rosa punched Jerry hard in the arm, exclaiming, You had that in your backpack the entire time?
Thought it would be useful, Jerry explained, and I guess I was right.
The horse stopped chewing, then turned to face us. We collectively flinched. With a sickening burp, an eyeball popped out of its throat and rolled across the dirty road. With that, the horse waddled away from the headless horseman and over to an open sewer drain against the sidewalk, where it quickly squeezed on through, never to be seen again. Oh, I said, that could be really bad for the local ecosystem. What now? Asked Rosa. Jerry walked over to the doctor's beheaded body, picked up his gun, then fished out his wallet. There were about $600 cash inside, along with 4 new Finders Keepers credit cards, which we would end up using to replace our phones.
Now, Jerry answered, to get the hell out of this one-horse town.
It was my first Halloween on Hamby Street, and I was raring to go. I just moved into the neighborhood the week before, and I was hoping to meet some of the kids on the street as I filled my bag with treats. Mom hadn't set out to move this close to Halloween, but when your dad decides he needs the house for his mistress and her kids, you have to pick up and go pretty quickly. The court had made him buy Mom out of half the house, but that wasn't too difficult for him. We had found a very nice house on Hamby Street, packed with families and little cracker box houses, but unpacking hadn't left me a lot of time to make friends. So now, standing on the front stoop in my homemade ghost costume, I was ready to find some friends. The costume had been last minute. My mom had honestly forgotten about it in the move, and when I had reminded her an hour ago, she had realized there was no time to buy one. So, hunting around, she found some old sheets, cut a couple of eye holes, and there we go. Classic ghost costume. It looked kind of lame next to the superheroes and cartoon characters that were tromping up and down the street, but I liked it. It reminded me of Charlie Brown from the storybook that I had on my bookshelf, and as I set out, I wondered if someone might actually give me a rock. I didn't get a rock, but I did get a lot of looks from those around me. I'd expected some laughs, maybe some questions about why I didn't have a real costume, but what I got was something between fear and scorn. People stepped out of my way. The adults looked down at me with disbelief, and a lot of the kids looked scared. I had to look at the front of the sheet a couple of times to make sure that there weren't any stains or something. No one wanted to talk to me. Most of the children turned away from me, and the people at the houses refused to give me candy. They slammed the door in my face almost immediately, some of them telling me that I should be ashamed of myself before doing it. That's how I came to be sitting on the sidewalk, trying not to cry, and wondering why I had bothered to come out at all. I had met no one. I'd made 0 friends, and I felt like I should have just gone home an hour ago. So when the group of other kids in ghost costumes walked down the street, they were pretty easy to spot. There were 5 of them, their ghost costumes looking dirty and ragged, and as they walked like a line of spooky ducklings, the crowd parted for them as well. They didn't stop at any of the houses, they didn't speak to anyone, they just kept making their way up the street like an arrow fired from a bow. I felt drawn to follow them for some reason. To this day, I can't say why. Maybe I felt some kind of kinship, or maybe it was the way people treated them. But regardless, I got up, and I ran to catch them, my shoes slapping the concrete as I went. The other kids watched me go with genuine concern, but I didn't care much. These kids seemed to have made the same mistake I had, and it seemed like it was better to be an outcast as a group than it was to be alone. Hey, wait up! I called, the 5 ghosts utterly ignoring me as we went along. We walked in our now 6 ghost line, and I began attempting to make conversation with them. They looked to be about my age, or at least my height, and they all carried brightly colored candy bags that were in the same sorry shape as their costumes. They were mud-spattered, ripped in places, and the kid in front of me had shoes with a sole coming loose. His left sole slapped at the pavement, going whap, whap, whap. And I wondered what sort of costumes these were. Were they some kind of zombie ghost or something? Next to my clean white sheet, they looked downright grimy, and I wondered why their parents had let them leave the house like this. Where are we going? I finally asked, all of them leaving my neighborhood as we turned a corner and headed into a less crowded street. I promised my mom I wouldn't go too far, and I don't know the streets real well. They ignored me, but I wouldn't have long to wander. I'd seen the house before. Mom and I staring at it as we'd driven into town. It stood out, the grass long, the fence ragged, but the house was the centerpiece of the unkempt space. It probably once been a very nice one-story house. But it looked like someone had pelted it with eggs or dirt or both. And the owner hadn't bothered to clean it off. The windows were boarded up, the shingles hung raggedly from the roof, and someone had sprayed "Killer" across the garage door in big red letters. It was impossible not to notice, and I realized too late that it was our destination. Are we trick-or-treating there? I don't even think anyone lives there. They didn't say anything, but I realized I was wrong a few minutes later. I could see a light peeking from a crack in one of the boarded-up windows, and as the ghosts arrived on the sidewalk, it was suddenly covered by a shadow. The ghosts did not approach the house. They didn't even come off the sidewalk. They just stood there, bags in hand, and stared at the house. The shadow moved away from the opening a few times, but it always came back in short order. It was a fitful thing, moving away only to come back quicker and quicker to check that ghosts were still there. I kept turning to look at them, asking what we were doing and receiving no answer. The ghost kids just stood and stared, boring into the house with their dark circle eyes. I think that was when I really got a good look at them. Their sheets weren't just grimy, they were covered in muddy tracks. Some of the stains looked like they could be blood, but the worst was the bare stretch of leg beneath the sheets. The skin on those legs, they were cut and bleeding, purple, bruised, and the arms were in a similar state of abuse. The eyes were the worst. Looking out from the open holes were darkened eyes that were purple with rings. The kids looked like they had gone 10 rounds with a professional boxer, and the part that usually had color was pitch black and unblinking. These kids weren't interested in candy. They were out for something else. I had opened my mouth to ask them why they were just standing here when the door suddenly opened and a man in dirty, sweat-stained clothes came weaving out. He wore sweatpants and a tank top, and his bare feet looked like he had bumped them enough times to break every toe on him. He was thin to the point of being skeletal, and the clothes hung off him like rags. I worried at first they might be drunk, weaving and pivoting across the yard, but the closer he got, the more I came to understand that he was stoned sober. He wasn't stumbling, he was afraid. And it took everything he had to approach the ghost kids. "What do you want?" he stammered, his foot catching on something in the tall grass. Why do you torment me?" The grass was so tall that you could hear the dry husks scraping across his pants. But if it bothered him, or the 5 other little ghosts, it never showed. "Haven't I suffered enough? The town won't let me forget. My ex-wife won't let me forget. And now you return every Halloween to remind me of my mistakes? Why? Why? Just leave me alone. Haven't I suffered enough?" He stumbled again, his foot catching hard this time. And when he bumped into me, he barely missed being knocked down. That's when he realized I was something else. He looked at me in disbelief, but it quickly turned to rage. He lunged forward, grabbing me and shaking me as I tried to articulate something, anything, that would make him stop. He was hurting me, my head snapping back and forth as he shook, and I couldn't make a sound as he tried to shake me to death. You aren't one of them. There were only 5 of them. There's always been 5 of them. Why are you here? Why are you tormenting? Why are you... Something hit him in the face, and he fell back in the grass, clutching at his cheek. Something wet, sticky, rolled down his neck. And I had a moment of fear as I wondered if it might be his eye. It wasn't. I saw that when he pulled his hand away. When the second one hit him, I saw it was an egg, as a third and a fourth joined in. "Get off him, you killer! Haven't you killed enough kids already?" I turned to see 3 kids on the opposite sidewalk. A carton of eggs between their feet and their hands already throwing more. The man scuttled backwards, shielding his face as he went, and disappeared into the grass as more eggs came pelting in. I heard the crunch of old weeds. It was followed by the slam of a door. And when I heard sneakers coming towards me, I put a hand up in case the eggs came flying my way. "You okay, kid?" I looked up to find a Power Ranger, the red one, extending his hand to help me up. That was Ryan, someone who'd later become my best friend over the next few days. "Yeah," I said, accepting the hand up. I looked over to where the other ghosts had been, but they were all gone. I suppose they'd gotten what they came for. "Oh, let me help you with that," he said, taking the sheet off and folding it a little as he draped it around me. After a few minutes of fussing with it, his friends came over to help. He had made a halfway decent toga out of it. His friends, soon to be my friends too, Rob and Patrick, agreed that it looked a lot better, though it clashed with their Power Ranger costumes badly. "Hey, you're the kid that just moved in on Hamby, right?" Ryan asked. "I'm Ryan, it's Patrick, and Robert. Just Rob," he insisted as he waved. They invited me to come with them, chucking another dozen or so eggs at the house that the man had scuttled back into. They didn't seem angry about it. They did it like it was an expected chore and almost seemed bored. They left the trash in the yard before picking up their bikes and walking back the way I'd come towards the happy sounds of our active street. "Why'd you guys egg his house anyway?" I asked. The 4 of us passing more kids on their way with eggs. "Did he do something to you?" I expected them to laugh or maybe act proud of what they'd done, but they just shrugged. It was a look I sometimes saw on people who were voting or going about volunteer work. Bored, but certain of their actions. And it was something that was hard to make sense of at the age of 10. "We egg his house every year. Everyone does. No one likes Horus Jenkins, but especially not on Halloween." "Why?" I asked, still confused. "The same reason I bet no one's giving you candy. No one wears ghost costumes, after what he did." "But what did he do?" I said, starting to get aggravated. Ryan turned like he was going to yell at me for being stupid, but seemed to remember I was new. So it was probably about 15 years ago, way before we were born. Horus Jenkins was the owner of some company, something that was doing well around here, but it didn't make people like him. Horus Jenkins, from what my dad says, was a mean man. He didn't treat people right. He was rude, he didn't support the community, but he was rich, so people let him stay. One Halloween night about 15 years ago, he was coming home drunk from a party, one that he'd been with a rich friend of his, and, he ran over 5 kids. One's in ghost costumes. He was all over the news. People knew he did it, but he got some hotshot lawyer who got him out without jail time. They claimed the kids had been running across the road, they claimed Horus hadn't actually been drunk, and they cast a lot of doubt and made a lot of deals. At least, that's what Dad says. Afterward, Horus tried to pay the families off, but they wouldn't take the money. No one in town would take his money. No one would work for his company. He lost all of it when his wife left him. She took his house, his cars, his kids, and he was left with that little house, and I guess not much else. The people here let him live in the house, but they let him know that we haven't forgotten. After the accident, it was considered kind of disrespectful to wear ghost costumes anymore, and that's why no one does it. They didn't know you were the new kid on the block, they just thought you were being mean. And, now you know better. Hey, Caesar? Caesar became my nickname after that, and my makeshift toga got me a lot of candy before the streetlights went out. I spent some time afterward trading candy with my new friends and promising to see him at school the next day. I still live in that town some 20 years later, and it's still considered a tradition to go egg Horus Jenkins' house. Yeah, he's still alive. An old codger of 79. and I've realized the town keeps him around as a warning. Working for the bank, come to find that Horus Jenkins has no money, no assets, and not a penny to his name. But his taxes are paid, his power and water bills are paid, food's left on his doorstep once a week to sustain him. I mean, it's nothing gourmet. Basics are good enough for him, but it keeps him alive and living in a house that's slowly rotting around him. Once a year, someone spray paints killer on the garage door. And once a year, we all throw eggs and dirt clods at his house to remind him that he tried to cheat his way out of 5 lives. The law may have exonerated him, but the town does not forget, and it doesn't forgive. Sometimes when my friends and I throw our eggs at that sagging wreck, I think I see 5 little ghosts on the sidewalk staring at the house. The house of the man who murdered him. Sometimes while I throw my eggs at the temple of hatred, I wish Horus Jenkins would live 1,000 years. And then I remember. Those ghost kids will be waiting for him. And that brings me some comfort. Hartford Hart Williams stepped out of the transport van and into a world of frost and wonder. The ice hotel loomed before him, ethereal and otherworldly, its crystalline walls glowing faintly under the Arctic twilight. The towering structure, carved entirely from ice, reflected the dim sunlight in a kaleidoscope of blues and whites, a frozen masterpiece of artistry and engineering. Hart had seen pictures online, read the travel blogs, watched the videos, but none of it compared to the surreal reality of standing here in person. "It's smaller than I expected," someone murmured behind him, their voice muffled by the scarf wrapped around their face. Hart disagreed. The ice hotel seemed enormous to him, less like a building, more like a cathedral, raised in worship of the cold itself. The sheer grandeur of it made his breath catch, though that might also have been the biting chill of the Arctic air. He pulled his parka tighter around himself and took a deep breath, the frosty vapor curling in front of his face. "Welcome to the Ice Hotel," the cheery voice broke through the silence. A tall man with curly hair and an easy grin waved from the entrance. "I'm Larry, your ice concierge for the week. Trust me, you're gonna love it here." A group of guests shuffled towards the doors, their boots crunching over the snow-covered pathway. As Hart approached the entrance, he felt a pang of unease that he couldn't quite place. The hotel's icy facade seemed to shift under the pale light, as though the carved walls were breathing, subtly expanding and contracting. He blinked, and the feeling was gone. Inside the ice hotel was a revelation. The lobby stretched high above him. Its vaulted ceilings shimmered with light from an enormous chandelier made entirely of ice. The floors were polished to a mirror-like finish, reflecting the intricate sculptures that lined the walls. Towering over the entrance was a massive elephant head, carved from a single block of ice, its trunk curling gracefully towards the floor. The tusks gleamed, smooth and sharp, while the eyes, dark glinting gemstones, seemed to follow him as he passed. "This," Larry said, spreading his arms theatrically, "is the heart of the Ice Hotel. Every year we rebuild it from scratch. Artists from around the globe come here to design and carve these sculptures. Every detail you see is unique to this season." Hart moved deeper into the lobby, marveling at the artistry. Along one wall, a row of frozen trees stretched their branches, each leaf etched with such precision it looked ready to fall. Near the entrance to a hallway stood a life-sized wolf, poised mid-stride, its eyes fierce and glinting with predatory intent. The sculptures were beautiful, but there was something about them, something too alive, that made Hart uneasy.
Wow, a woman beside him murmured. It's like walking into another world.
Hart turned to see her smiling at him. She was mid-30s with dark hair tucked under a knit hat and a friendly warmth in her eyes.
First time here?
She asked. Yeah, Hart replied, still taking in the surreal surroundings. It's a lot to take in. His mind flashed to his father's funeral 5 weeks prior. The smell of heavy and burdening sorrow was stuffed into sachets that lined each and every church pew, made more prominent by a sea of black clothing. Tears. The man we had all gathered for, once a booming captain of industry, now lay in the middle of rows of flowers, withered, like a tiny bee who had suffocated itself in pollen. That same smell had followed him into the probate attorney's office, where he was presented a letter from his father to be given to him in the event of his passing. Dear Hartford, you have brought so much joy to your mother and I, and we couldn't be prouder. I've tried to teach you many things, but sadly one lesson was missed. I divided my entire estate between you and your sister on the request that you live your life better than I did mine. Fall in love, go places, see the world while you can, because whether you realize it or not, you've been building your bucket list for most of your life. Use this money to clear that list. As I've proven today, you only live. The woman chuckled, her laughter dissipating his thoughts. No kidding. I'm Patrice, by the way. Hart, he said, shaking her gloved hand. Hart Williams. They exchanged pleasantries as Larry called out names and handed out room keys. Patrice explained that she was visiting the Ice Hotel as a way of using her newly divorced husband's money to achieve a dream they had together. I figured why not? Life's short. I didn't need him to enjoy this. She shrugged. There was a hint of something unspoken in her voice, a sadness she tried to mask with a bright smile. Soon, Larry led them down a winding hallway lined with ice carvings, explaining the hotel's layout and amenities as they walked. When they reached Hart's suite, he stopped in his tracks, stunned. The room was an Arctic dreamscape. Frosted trees grew from the walls, their branches arching overhead to form a frozen canopy. The bed, carved from a single block of ice, was covered in thick reindeer hides and heavy blankets, the only splash of warmth in the otherwise glacial room. Larry handed him the key with a grin. Don't worry, it's warmer than it looks. Those hides will keep you cozy. Just don't lick the walls, okay? Hart laughed despite himself, watching as Larry moved on to the next room. He set down his bag and ran a hand over the hides. The contrast between the cold, hard ice and the softness of the blankets was oddly satisfying. Exhausted from the journey, he slipped under the covers that night and was surprised by how quickly he warmed up. His sleep was deep, though not entirely peaceful. He dreamed of frozen forests, stretching endlessly to a dark horizon. Shadowy figures moved among the trees, their eyes glinting like stars as they watched him. He felt no fear, only a strange, quiet acceptance, as if the icy world was drawing him in. By morning, he awoke feeling oddly refreshed, though the memory of those eyes lingering in his mind like fragments of forgotten thought. The next day dawned pale and cold, the faint Arctic sun casting long shadows over the hotel. Hart spent the morning exploring the Ice Hotel's many wonders. Each suite was a work of art, with themes ranging from fairy tales to abstract designs,
One room was styled as a frozen ocean, its walls carved with waves and schools of fish that seemed to shimmer in the light. Another was a winter palace, complete with a throne sculpted from ice. The corridors twisted and turned, making the hotel feel much larger than it had seemed from the outside. Hart marveled at the artistry, but found himself disoriented at times. The hallways blending together in a maze of frosted walls. He joined the other guests in the lounge for lunch, where they gathered around a bar carved entirely from ice. Crystal clear glasses clinked against the smooth surface as Larry served cocktails and joked with the group. "Can you believe this place?" Patrice asked, sliding onto the stool beside him. She looked more relaxed than she had the day before, her cheeks pink from the cold. "It's been like a dream." Hart nodded, sipping his drink. "Yeah, I can't shake the feeling that it's watching us." Patrice raised an eyebrow and laughed softly. "The hotel? Maybe." Hart grinned sheepishly. "I mean, look at these sculptures. They're too perfect. It's like they're alive." Patrice glanced at the wolf statue in the corner, its icy gaze fixed and unblinking. "I see what you mean," she said, lowering her voice. "It's a little unsettling." Larry joined them, his usual bright demeanor in full force. "Don't let the sculptures scare you," he said, overhearing their conversation. "This place is magic, sure, but it's a good kind of magic. People come here to escape, to find something special, and it always delivers." His words lingered in Hart's mind long after lunch. That night, as he lay in bed beneath the glowing ice canopy, he thought about what Larry had said. The hotel did feel magical, but not in the way that Larry described. It felt alive, like it was watching, waiting. His dreams were more vivid this time. He walked through an endless maze of icy corridors, the walls shifting around him as he moved. The shadowy figures from before were closer now. Their eyes gleamed like cold fire. They whispered, their voices soft and urgent. But he couldn't understand the words. Hart awoke to a pale gray light filtering through the frosted window of his suite. The faint glow made the icy canopy above his bed glisten as if the frozen branches were alive. He lay there for a moment, cocooned in warmth, listening to the faint whistle of the wind outside. But as he stirred, the wind grew louder, angrier. By the time he reached the window, it howled with a force that rattled the panes. Outside, the world was white, the horizon swallowed in a torrent of swirling snow. The storm had arrived, erasing the edges of the landscape and wrapping the ice hotel in a cocoon of isolation. It was as though the storm had sealed them off from the world, leaving only the hotel and whatever lay inside it. By mid-afternoon, the guests had gathered in the ballroom. Their laughter and conversation echoed off the smooth ice walls. Hart found himself lingering near the bar, nursing a vodka chilled to perfection in a glass carved from frozen water. The chandeliers overhead sparkled, refracting light that danced across the walls in shimmering patterns. "Now, this storm's no joke," said a guest nearby, a burly man in a heavy sweater. "They're saying it could last all night." "It's a good thing we're here, not out there," Patrice said, her voice light but her gaze distracted. She sat beside Hart, stirring her drink absently. "It's like the hotel was built for this, isn't it? Sanctuary." Hart glanced at her, catching the unease in her tone. Before he could respond, the ballroom doors swung open and a woman stumbled inside, her face as pale as the snow outside. She clutched the frame of the doorway, her breath coming in sharp gasps. "The view," she said, her voice trembling. "It changed."
The room fell silent. "What do you mean?" Larry asked, stepping forward, his ever-present grin faltering. "I don't know how to explain it," the woman stammered. It's not the same. It's wrong." Curiosity prickled through the group. Larry offered her a calming smile, though it looked strained. "I'm sure it's just the storm playing tricks," he said, "but let's have a look." Hart followed Larry and a handful of guests as they made their way towards the woman's suite. The corridor was dim, the light from the chandeliers overhead flickering slightly as if the hotel itself were holding its breath. By the time they reached her room, Hart felt a cold weight settle in his chest, heavier than the icy air. The woman gestured to the window with a trembling hand. "It was flat yesterday, just snow, but now, look." Hart peered out, his breath fogging the frosted glass. The storm had cleared just enough to reveal a jagged cliff edge, mere feet from the building. Below, an abyss yawned, black, infinite, as if the earth itself had been swallowed whole. "Jesus," someone muttered behind him. "That wasn't there before," the woman said, her voice rising. "It wasn't!" The air in the room felt tight, as though the walls were pressing inward. Hart stepped back, his pulse pounding. Larry, hesitant, then forced a cheery laugh. "It's just the wind shifting the snowdrifts," he said. "Optical illusions and all that." But Hart didn't buy it. He could feel the truth creeping in. Cold, undeniable. The hotel was moving. One of the braver guests, a wiry man in his 40s, muttered something about checking it out. Before anyone could stop him, he threw on his coat and slipped out through the back exit. Hart caught a glimpse of him as he neared the cliff, his boots crunching in the ice. Be careful," Larry called, his voice taut with strain. The man crouched near the edge, peering into the darkness below. He turned back towards the group, waving as if to say it was fine. And then the ice beneath him cracked. The sound was deafening, echoing through the frozen air. Hart's breath caught as the man's arms flailed, his mouth opening in a silent scream. For a moment he hung there, teetering on the edge, and then he was gone. Swallowed by the void. Someone screamed. Hart couldn't move, his feet rooted to the floor as the ice at the edge of the cliff glistened red where the man had fallen. The storm roared as if in approval. Larry clapped his hands, his voice forced and bright. "Everyone inside! Come on now, no need to stand out here!" Hart didn't need to be told twice. As he followed the group back into the safety of the hotel, he couldn't shake the feeling that the building itself was watching, its walls tightening around them like a frozen predator, closing in on its prey. The next morning, the storm showed no signs of letting up. Hart woke to an oppressive silence, broken only by the faint thrum of wind outside. The light filtering through his window was dim and gray, giving the room an eerie glow. He dressed quickly and stepped into the hallway, which felt colder than before. The air was sharp, biting, and the walls seemed to shimmer in a faint pulse, as though the ice itself was alive. He walked cautiously, his footsteps echoing, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the oppressive quiet. The day passed in a blur of tension. The guests gathered in clusters, whispering amongst themselves. Larry, ever the optimist, did his best to maintain morale, organizing games in the lounge and handing out drinks with his usual charm. But Hart could see the strain in his face. The man who had fallen was never mentioned. Patrice sat quietly in the corner, staring at the chandelier overhead. When Hart approached, she gave him a faint smile, but it was fragile, as though it might shatter at the slightest touch. "I don't like this," she admitted, her voice low. "The storm, the cliff, this place." "It's just a storm," Hart said, though he didn't believe it himself. "We'll be fine." Patrice glanced at him, her eyes dark. "Feels like the walls are closing in. Like the hotel is alive." Her words sent a shiver down his spine, but before he could respond, a loud crack echoed through the room. The guests froze as the chandelier overhead trembled, tiny shards of ice falling like glass rain, and then it happened. The stalactite, a massive shard of ice, broke free from the ceiling, plunging down with a deafening crash. It struck Larry where he stood, piercing his chest, pinning him to the floor. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure shock, his eyes wide and unseeing as blood seeped across the icy surface. For a moment, no one moved. The air felt thick, suffocating. And then the screams began. That night, Hart lay awake in his room, the reindeer hides pulled tightly around him. The hotel felt different now. It's quiet, no longer comforting but oppressive, as though it were waiting. The walls seemed to pulse faintly like a heartbeat, and he thought he could hear whispers in the darkness. When sleep finally came, it was restless. He dreamed of endless hallways that twisted and turned, their walls slick with ice that pulsed under his touch. Shadowy figures lurked at the edges of his vision, watching him, their eyes glowing faintly. He woke drenched in sweat, the whispers still echoing in his ears. When he stepped into the hallway, his heart stopped. The corridor was littered with bodies, naked, pale, lifeless. They lay sprawled across the ice in grotesque positions, their faces frozen in expressions of terror, their limbs were twisted unnaturally, as though they had been broken and reassembled. The smell of blood hung in the air, sharp and metallic, and the walls seemed to glow faintly, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. Hart's stomach churned as his eyes fell on Patrice. She lay among the dead, her arms outstretched as if reaching for help that had never come. Her eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. Her mouth frozen in a silent scream. His knees buckled and he fell to the floor, bile rising in his throat, and for a moment he couldn't move, he couldn't think. The walls seemed to lean in around him, and the faint thrum of the pulse grew louder, echoing in his ears. The hotel was alive. And it was feeding. Hart remained frozen in the hallway, his breathing fogging the frigid air as his mind struggled to process the scene before him. The bodies, the blood, the way their pale, contorted forms seemed to merge with the icy floor as if the hotel itself had claimed them. His eyes locked onto Patrice's lifeless body, her expression frozen in an unbearable mix of terror and pleading. She had reached for help for him, and he hadn't been there. The faint sound of the wind outside mingled with the unsettling stillness of the corridor. The flickering light from the ice sconces cast distorted shadows on the walls, making the scene feel like a macabre painting come to life. Hart's stomach churned as he forced himself to turn away, steadying himself against the cold wall. The ice beneath his hand vibrated faintly, not from the storm outside, but from something deeper. A rhythmic thrum that seemed to pulse through the structure. A heartbeat. Hart jerked his hand back, his breathing quickening. He staggered down the corridor, his boots slipping on the smooth ice as he put as much distance as he could between himself and the gruesome tableau. The pulse in the walls seemed to follow him. A steady rhythm that grew louder the further he went. The air grew colder, sharper, biting at his exposed skin. He rounded a corner and leaned heavily against the wall, his breath coming in gasps that crystallized in the freezing air. The hallway stretched endlessly before him. Or had it always been this long? He wasn't sure anymore. The layout of the hotel, once charmingly labyrinthian, now seemed malicious, shifting around him like a living maze. His hands trembled as he pressed them to his temples, trying to steady his thoughts. "It's not real," he whispered, his voice sounding weak and small in the icy silence. "It's just not real." But deep down, he knew it was. The rest of the hotel seemed abandoned. He stumbled through the corridor, calling out, his voice echoing off the ice walls. No one answered. The guests and staff had either vanished or joined the bodies in the hallway outside his room. He passed through the lounge, the dining hall, even the ballroom, each space eerily untouched, as though the horror outside hadn't reached them. Yet the oppressive atmosphere lingered, pressing down on him like a suffocating weight. In the ballroom, the chandeliers above flickered faintly. Hart paused beneath one, staring up at its frozen splendor. He thought about Larry, his cheerful optimism extinguished in an instant by the falling stalactite. The image of Larry's lifeless body, blood pooling around him, flashed through Hart's mind, and he shuddered. The whispers began then. Faint at first, barely distinguishable from the soft hum of the ice, but growing louder with each step he took. Words he couldn't understand layered over each other in a cacophony of hushed tones. He spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing, only the shimmering walls and the faint pulse that had become impossible to ignore. And then he saw it. At the far end of the ballroom, a door he hadn't noticed before. It was seamless, almost indistinguishable from the wall around it, but it pulsed faintly with a soft blue light. The whispers grew louder as he approached, and he hesitated, his hand hovering over the icy surface. Part of him screamed to turn back, to run as far and as fast as he could, but there was nowhere else to go. Nowhere to hide. The hotel wouldn't let him. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. The chamber beyond was vast, its walls glowing with an eerie, translucent light. Hart stepped inside, the temperature dropping instantly, the air sharp and heavy. The ice beneath his feet was smooth, almost glass-like. And as he looked down, he saw something moving beneath the surface. Veins. Dark, pulsing veins stretched across the floor, branching out and weaving through the walls like a living circulatory system. They pulsed in time with a rhythmic thrum that he'd heard each beat, sending a ripple of energy through the room. The glow intensified, illuminating the chamber with a sickly blue light. And Hart felt a wave of nausea roll over him. This wasn't a hotel. This had never been a hotel. It was alive. The whispers crescendoed, filling the chamber, and Hart clutched his head, stumbling forward. His breath fogged the air as his vision blurred. The light around him bending and twisting. The walls seemed to move, the veins contracting and expanding like lungs, inhaling and exhaling. And then, from a far corner of the chamber, something stirred. A figure emerged from the shadows, its skeletal frame coated in frost and ice. Its limbs were twisted, impossibly long and jagged, its hollow eyes glowing faintly with a cold, malevolent light. It moved towards him slowly, its steps uneven, its body creaking with every motion. Hart stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest, as the creature raised a claw-like hand, its fingers curling and uncurling with eerie precision. "Stay back!" Hart shouted, his voice cracking. He reached for something, anything, but his hands found only the smooth, unyielding ice. The creature paused, tilting its head as if studying him. Its hollow eyes burned into his. And Hart felt his knees weaken. The whispers grew, deafening. And for a moment, he thought he could understand them. They weren't just voices, they were the hotel speaking through the ice, through the walls, through the veins that pulsed beneath him. They were calling for him. The chamber pulsed again, and Hart's vision wavered. He dropped to his knees, clutching at his chest, as the cold seeped into him, deeper than skin, deeper than bone. He could feel the hotel's hunger, its ancient cosmic need. The creature took another step forward, its clawed hand outstretched. And Hart understood. This was no sanctuary. It was a trap. The Ice Hotel was a living entity, an ancient being that fed on blood and souls, drawing its victims into its frozen embrace and consuming them one by one. And he was next. The chamber throbbed, a rhythmic pulse so loud now that it seemed to reverberate through Hart's very bones. The veins beneath the ice glowed a deep, sickly blue, radiating an energy that was both hypnotic and terrifying. The skeletal creature moved closer, its frost-covered body emitting a faint crackling sound with every step. Hart scrambled back to his hands and knees, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps that crystallized in the freezing air. His mind raced, every nerve screaming for him to flee. But his body refused to obey. The whispers, louder now, filled his ears with overlapping, unintelligible words. They weren't just sounds, they were pulling him in, compelling him forward, towards the creature and the pulsing veins that seemed to be waiting for him. "No," he choked out, shaking his head. "This can't be real." But it was. The whispers reached a fever pitch as the creature knelt in front of him, its hollow eyes fixed on his. It raised a clawed hand, brushing it lightly against his face. The ice burned like fire, and Hart cried out, falling back. The creature tilted its head, almost curious, as it leaned closer, its mouth open in a soundless scream, its breathing a freezing gale that tore at his skin. The hotel was alive, and it was hungry. Hart staggered to his feet, his legs trembling, What do you want? He shouted, his voice cracking. Why are you doing this? The whispers softened, merging into a single voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Deep, resonant, and ancient, it filled the chamber with a chilling authority. Sacrifice, it intoned. The word echoed, twisting through the icy walls like a living thing. Blood, souls, you. The veins beneath his feet pulsed brighter, and Hart felt the heat drain from his body. His knees buckled and he collapsed, his hands pressing against the ice as though trying to ground himself, but the ice beneath him wasn't solid anymore. It was alive, shifting and rippling under his touch like flesh. This can't be happening, he whispered, his voice shaking. It's a building. It's just a building. The entity's voice responded, cold and unrelenting. This form is what you see. I choose for you to see. I am older than this ice, older than the stars above. You are my sustenance, my offering. The chamber seemed to shrink around him, the walls leaning in as the pulsing veins grew brighter. He could feel the hotel feeding off of his fear, drawing strength from his desperation. It wanted more. It wanted everything. Hart's mind raced. Fragments of the past few days flashed before him. The other guests, Patrice, Larry, the bodies in the hallway, they had all been part of this, chosen by the hotel to feed its endless hunger. He saw Patrice's face again, her eyes wide and terrified, and guilt twisted in his stomach. He hadn't saved her. He hadn't saved anyone. I won't let you take me, Hart said, his voice barely above a whisper, but even as he spoke, he knew it was futile. The hotel had chosen him. It had been waiting for this moment, biding its time, and there was no escaping its grasp. The creature reached for him again, its skeletal fingers closing around his wrist with a grip like frozen iron. It pulled him towards the center of the chamber, where the veins converged into a massive, glowing heart embedded in the ice. The pulse was deafening now, each beat vibrating through the air like a drum. Hart's breath caught as the heart began to glow brighter, its light enveloping him. Your fear strengthens me, the voice said, resonating through the chamber. Your blood completes me. Hart's mind reeled as he fought against the creature's grip, but it was impossibly strong. He was dragged to the heart, the icy veins wrapping around his ankles and wrists like living chains. The cold seeped into his skin, spreading through his body like poison, and he cried out as his strength faded. The ice beneath him softened, giving way as the veins tightened their hold. He could feel his life draining away, siphoning into the glowing heart. The whispers returned. Softer now, almost soothing, as if the hotel were thanking him for his sacrifice. Hart's vision blurred. The edges of the chamber faded into black. The whispers slowed, their urgency fading, and he felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. His thoughts drifted to Patrice, to Larry, to the others who had come before him. He wondered if they'd felt the same peace before the end. The pulsing heart grew brighter, its rhythm steady and strong as Hart's body sank deeper into the ice. The hotel fed. Its hunger sated. For now. As the Arctic sun rose, the ice hotel began to dissolve. The walls cracked and melted. The sculptures collapsed into pools of crystal clear water. The bodies, the whispers, the creature, all of it disappeared, leaving only an empty stretch of snow and ice where the hotel had once stood. The storm faded and the landscape returned to its quiet stillness. But deep beneath the frozen earth, the ancient entity lingered, dormant but not gone. It waited patiently, biding its time until the next travelers stumbled into its frozen domain, drawn by promises of beauty and wonder. The ice hotel would rise again, and it would feed. There are 9 of them total. 9 massive concrete chimneys sticking out of the landscape like candles on a birthday cake. Up until my last week, the scariest thing about them was the deep booming noise they sometimes produced, which shook the ground. The ferocity of a subwoofer cranked up all the way. They'd spout out one at a time, like geysers releasing pressure. I'd walk the perimeter, and there went chimney 3, followed by chimney 5, and then suddenly chimney 8 and 9 would go together. That's as weird as it got. Before I noticed the thing in chimney 7. I want to make it clear from the get-go, I have no idea what the chimneys do or why they're here. They're alone in a fenced-off field with no buildings in sight. There are 3 padlocked doors on opposite ends of the property, and roads made only from the flattening effect of tires on grass, the one nearest to chimney 7 being overgrown. I think there must be bunkers beneath my feet, although I suppose the doors could also lead to storage sheds. It's hard to tell, and I've been told not to ask. Why are the chimneys there? Is this some sort of nuclear power plant? Are they testing sound cannons? Are they part of an experiment? Pressure valves from a dormant supervolcano. I don't have answers to those questions. I wish I did, but I'm just a temp. Anytime I've tried asking, I've been told the answers were on a need-to-know basis, and all I needed to know was that the chimneys needed patrolling, and that patrolling them was my job. That and reporting anything unusual. The first few weeks were fine. It took a bit of adjusting, especially to the noise. The first time I heard the boom, I was so scared I nearly peed myself. I thought something had gone wrong and that the whole field was about to collapse. I know it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but really, put yourself in my shoes. You're minding your own business when your temp agency calls in the middle of the night. There's an employer offering twice your hourly rate on the condition that you leave immediately. It's the new moon, right? So you drive 30 miles out of town in complete darkness. You get there. There's only one guy there to greet you. He tells you their patrolman never showed up for his shift tonight. Gives you the job. Makes you sign a non-disclosure agreement. Tells you to walk around the field, climb the chimneys, radio and anything strange. That's it. He leaves you there. You start to walk. It's the dead of night, no traffic. Complete and utter silence. And then suddenly, boom! It is terrifying. I tried to radio it in, but it took half an hour to find a spot where the connection was strong enough to hear the reply. That's normal. Keep patrolling. That's what they told me. Cold, clinical, straightforward. Each subsequent boom made me less and less nervous, but I never quite got out of the split second of dread they caused. I think it's because they came at random. There was no way to brace myself. If you know every single garbage bin might have someone in it waiting to jump out at you, but you don't know which or when, that spike in your heart rate will be a lot higher. I'm not here to tell you about the booming noises. I'm here to tell you about Chimney 7. Chimney 7 was just like all the others. I'd say it was approximately 9, maybe 10 stories high. There was a graded and, in places, rusty spiral staircase circling around it all the way to the top. I couldn't tell you the exact circumference, but it was wide enough that you'd be able to drop a car into the hole without hitting the sides. It took approximately 6 minutes to climb the stairs and only 5 to get back down. And that's without resting. Up until my last week, Chimney 7 was no different from the others. And then came the night where everything changed. It was cold enough that I could see my breath. And halfway through my shift, I'd grabbed an old baseball cap from the back of my truck to keep my head warm. Nothing special, just a green cap with Fido Dido printed on it. Yeah, I know, showing my age. Although I'd never seen smoke coming from the chimneys, despite me calling them chimneys. That evening, as I approached Chimney 7, I spotted a small wisp of smoke billowing through the air. Since it was my job to report anything unusual, I tried radioing out, but all I heard was static. Couldn't have been farther from the spot my signal normally goes through if I'd been actively trying to avoid it, so I decided that if I was going to make the effort to walk all the way back, I better make damn sure I had something to report. Began climbing the steps around Chimney 7. And as I did, I heard a low growl that stopped me dead in my tracks. I closed my eyes, and I listened. But I couldn't pinpoint the source. Figured it was the sound of the grate buckling in the cold, maybe scraping against the concrete wall, but the closer I got to the top, the louder it got. Once I reached the topmost platform, I realized it was coming from the chimney. Something mechanical, I figured. Probably malfunctioning to boot. I figured I'd have a look into the chimney. I was reluctant, see. I'd never tried before, nor have I been instructed to do so. I mean, I suppose I could have, but those damn sonic-like booms made me nervous. All those nights in the dark made my imagination run wild, and I had this vivid, unshakable mental image that if I craned my neck and looked into the hole, the chimney would boom, and my head would just be blasted straight off my neck. With that fear very much at the forefront of my mind, I gripped the edge of the chimney and shyly poked my head over just enough to be able to see. There was nothing but blackness beyond the top few stories. Blackness and a symphony of wind howling through the tunnel, with a growl that seemed to cycle from low to high to low again, as though the chimney were a sleeping, snoring giant. No sooner had I popped my head in did I pull it back out, and that was enough bravery for one night. I climbed down and hurried to the radio spot, giving my report. But while it did sound like the signal went through, I never got a reply. The next night, I wasn't quite as reluctant to look into Chimney 7. All evening, I'd kept tabs of which chimney had been booming, and good old 7 hadn't done it once. I figured it really was defective, and therefore safe. I climbed the stairs to the same growly tune, and I peered inside. pushing my head in further than the night before. A gust of wind coming from deep below flung my cap in the air and out of reach. It spiraled its way down the chimney like a helicopter seed. It disappeared from sight. I wasn't fond enough of the cap to contact the employer and beg for it back, but I wished I had something to stay warm. I flicked my flashlight on and moved the beam in circles, if only to see what had become of it, but the light couldn't penetrate far enough to see the bottom. Oh well. Again, I went back to the radio hotspot, and again, I mentioned the dysfunctional chimney. Still no reply. Something told me to steer clear of Chimney 7, and I listened to my guts for as long as I could. I'd circle close, but not too close to it, examining it from the vantage points of Chimney 6 and 8. I did this for 3 nights until I received my direct deposit paycheck and felt guilty about not doing my job. For my next shift, I bought a heavy-duty flashlight, and then I headed straight for Chimney 7. The light reached considerably farther. Down to ground level, I think, but even so, I couldn't see the bottom. What I could see, however, was that at about 3 stories down, just below where my original flashlight stopped working, I discovered scratch marks. I mean, I guess they could have been anything. Even with 20/20 vision, it's hard to tell a scratch from, say, a scratch-shaped graffiti. All I know is there was something marking up the walls all along the circumference. I mean, I was already spooked from the scratches, so I don't know if what I saw next was my mind playing tricks on me, but as I panned the halo around, I caught something on the farthest side. It was some sort of long, black shape. As soon as my light hit it, 2 bright spots reflected back at me and momentarily blinked at me. By the time my vision finally cleared and I looked again, there was nothing but concrete below. Took all my strength to finish my shift. I just had to remember the dollar signs that came with the mounting terror. They somehow convinced me I was imagining things. All the chimneys were quiet, and I found myself dreading the silence more than I dreaded the booms. It was raining, hard, which might explain why, as I walked past Chimney 7, I couldn't hear the growl I'd become accustomed to. I didn't want to go up, but I couldn't neglect my rounds again. It wouldn't be right. I was careful the whole way, hand clinging to the guardrail as I navigated the slippery circular staircase. Every step seemed to make the whole thing shake, and I was afraid the rusted metal would break once and for all. I was suddenly very aware of my added weight, what with the water having seeped into my clothes. Fortunately, the structure held, even though its integrity was in question. As I reached the platform at the top, I thought I could breathe a sigh of relief, but something caught my eye while I was trying to catch my breath. The rim of the chimney was broken. Large pieces of concrete littered the platform. I didn't need a flashlight to see the scratches this time. As I glanced into the chimney, I found deep gouges scratched up the wall all the way to the top, 3 on each side, with a 4th that seemed to come from a different angle. The cuts were deep and purposeful, like desperate fingers raking a cliffside as a hiker clung for dear life. Whatever clawed its way up, machine, animal, or... I didn't want to think of the alternatives. It was now somewhere out there, in the dark, and its grip was strong enough to break concrete.
I had had enough. Everything about this damn job put me on edge, and even though there was a reasonable explanation, maybe the gouges had been made by a grappling hook or a device to slide down the chimney from the top, like the ones window cleaners use, I was done. I was D-O-N-E done. As much as I wanted to run down the staircase and back to my truck, the rain was still coming down in sheets, and the last thing I needed was to slip and crack my head open, so I went slowly and methodically. And then suddenly, my worst nightmare came true. The stairs shook violently. I didn't mean that there was a gust of wind that made them jitter. I mean, they were shaking. My stomach dropped to my feet as I imagined whatever had created those deep cuts in the chimney was now climbing up towards me. The metal screeched as it bent, a sound far more unsettling than growling coming from a chimney, and a sound more grounded in reality and in danger. I screamed and hung onto the railing for dear life, and then I felt a pop. Not in my body, but against my body, but through the metal. Pop, pop, pop. The bolts connecting the hinges to the chimney were falling out one by one. Through the heavy rain, I could have sworn I heard a scream like a coyote, and then the staircase went still. I was out of breath. I was on my knees, arms wrapped around the railing and paralyzed with fear. I could tell the structure was no longer safely fastened to the tower, as it was swinging in the wind. But I couldn't see the extent of the damage. It took me a few minutes to gather the courage to start moving my white knuckles stiffly, releasing my death grip. It should have taken 5 minutes to get back down, but I spent 15. The longest 15 minutes of my life. I could hear the staircase shifting as I slowly made my way from step to step, hoping it would hold and trying not to shift my weight and throw everything off kilter. I didn't know how many bolts were left, or if my weight could make the others come out. As I neared the bottom, I saw the final flight had been pulled from a chimney. It was now suspended in the air. The handrail was warped outwards and undulated in parts like a bent twist tie. It was still too high to jump off, so I had to climb down as the stairs rocked like a ship in a storm. Solid ground never felt more solid. Until I saw something out of the corner of my eye. And the bottom seemed to drop out from under me. Between chimney 6 and 7, I found a baseball cap. It was shredded, but there was no mistaking the Fido Dido logo on it. It was mine. Around it were long, narrow footprints about the length of my arm, with branches stretching out in 4 different directions like talons. I didn't wait around to see what had left them. It's been 2 months since that night. I haven't gone back. I keep receiving paychecks. Like clockwork. Every 2 weeks there's another direct deposit in my bank account. I don't know if it's to buy my silence, or if there's just no one left to take me off the payroll. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video, or by listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. I know I haven't had as many updates as I would like to have on the channel lately, and things just kind of get really hard with shit that's happening in my family. But hey, I wanted to say thank you so much for being around. Thank you so much for still supporting me and for coming back to listen to new stories. If you guys want to get updates anytime that I do upload, then please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Or if you're listening over a podcast, I think it's still a subscribe button or a follow button or whatever happen. Those happen to be. As always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody out there on patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. A very, very big thank you
to everybody there, and to especially Jordan Humble, Diana Kraus, King Crab, Calcifer 420, Veronica Lynn Lopez, Marlon Chavez, Azazel 66603, Ethan Leon, Polaris Prospect X, Blake Rattler, Viceroy Scorn, Samara Lynn, Disciple, Silly Man, Brandon Mendoza, Brimstone Pandemonium, Caltuna, William Wellington, Scruffy the Janitor, Brenna Crow, Lakeda Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Dante Kinkade, Simba's Bloody Mojo, CursepoxPrimarch, M, Jettis Pet, Clonable, Jay Kieran, Mike, Himo Jerry, CrusaderChocobo, Remember the Sun, Estebean, Hour Minute Second Time, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Red Shadowcat, Turtleman, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Voice of Sand, Ficomel, Melted Lake, Tully Sue, Croconut 509, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, HIDive Nephew, Tommy Walters, AcidSystem, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Tristan Pelton, BallarmsTheRat, The Ginger Bros, Daniel Poulsen, and CoryxKenshin. To all of you guys there, everybody who's down in the description, and everybody who can just give $1, I want to say thank you to you guys. And if you would like to join this list in the description, head over to patreon.com/MrCreepy. And if you would like to join this list in the description, sweet dreams.